Chapter 1666. Zhou didn't pay much attention to the so-called spokespersons. Earth's complete breakout was imminent. He didn't have much time left, so he didn't have the time to pay attention to such trivial matters. In an ancient building in ancient imperial city, Zhou held the mysterious phone as his eyes widened. His eyeballs were about to pop out as beads of sweat the size of beans seeped out his forehead and dripped down his cheeks. Demonic neonate, banana fairy, and the other companion beasts looked at Zhou curiously, as though they were watching a rare animal. They couldn't be blamed for their curiosity. Zhou had maintained this posture for 17 to 18 hours. Apart from the occasional movement of his fingers, he was like a wooden figurine. In-game, Zhou once again controlled the blood-colored avatar to enter the small Buddha temple dungeon. In the past 10 hours or so, he had repeated this action countless times. The small perfection of Wisdom Sutra came from small Buddha temple. Zhou originally wanted to attempt to condense a domain to advance to the Calamity realm in small Buddha temple. Under Zhou's control, the game screen quickly turned black every time the blood-colored avatar entered the temple. Zhou never expected that small Buddha temple, a game dungeon that he had downloaded a long time ago, would be so terrifying. The three-faced Buddha that had once taken out 3 companion eggs for him to choose from was more terrifying than any calamity-grade creature Zhou had encountered before. Instant kill. As long as Zhou didn't use the small perfection of Wisdom Sutra and used other primordial energy arts to enter the temple, the blood-colored avatar would immediately die the moment the 6 eyes of the three-faced Buddha opened. Even if he used a chaos egg that had reached the calamity grade, it could only last for an instant before it instantly exploded. Zhou was almost certain that the three-faced Buddha was at least a top-notch calamity. It was at the heaven stage of the 3 calamities of the mortal world, hell, and heavenly realm. However, this was only a guess. Zhou believed that the three-faced Buddha might even be at the more terrifying apocalypse stage. In front of the three-faced Buddha, the stronger Zhou was, the stronger the three-faced Buddha was. He didn't even have the chance to pull out the immortal culling sword. However, even if he pulled it out and slashed out, it probably wouldn't be of much use. Zhou had tried almost every method he could think of, but he was still insta-killed. Facing such a terrifying three-faced Buddha, Zhou had already given up on using this place to advance the small perfection of Wisdom Sutra to the Calamity grade. The reason he kept sending himself to his death was that he realized that every time the Chaos Egg was destroyed, it would grow at an astonishing speed. In less than a day, under the constant ravaging of the three-faced Buddha, it was about to reach the threshold of the Hell stage. Over the past month, Zhou hadn't left his room much. Guide Ancient City was also silently changing, but this change was like a spring sun melting into snow. It happened silently, appearing out of place compared to the earth-shattering changes in the outside world. On Earth, more and more alien spokespersons appeared. Almost every alien spokesperson would display their strength on the Rubik's Cube through the Big Dipper dimensional zone. With MO, he, as the representative, one alien spokesperson after another attacked the Big Dipper dimensional zones and appeared on the Rubik's Cube ranking. The first spot on the Rubik's Cube ranking constantly changed. The top 10 rankings often changed, and the competition was abnormally intense. Many new powerhouses were known, and those who had entered the rankings before were gradually pushed to the back. The strength of the old powerhouses was also gradually being doubted by others. The top 10 spots on the rankings were occupied by the spokespersons of the various races. Now, everyone was discussing the strength of the spokespersons. Occasionally, when the veteran experts were mentioned, they were mostly discussing how far humans could go without the support of the alien races. Although a number of people firmly believed that experts like Human Emperor could fend off the alien race's spokespersons, even if they didn't become spokespersons, many people were more willing to dream of being chosen by an alien race one day and becoming a spokesperson. They wanted to become powerful in a short period of time and ascend the Rubik's Cube ranking to shock the world. However, there is no such thing as reaching the heavens in a single bound in this world. Most of the people who could become spokespersons of the alien races were genius-level experts who already stood at the top of the human pyramid. Even if they were unknown spokespersons, it was only because their potential hadn't been developed before they became spokespersons. Zhou wasn't in a hurry as he watched the spokespersons ascend the rankings, but someone was even more anxious than him. Han Shinsakura, are you crazy? In the Nittinin flying immortal palace, an old man pointed at Han Shinsakura. His fingers trembled violently as his face flushed red. The muscles on his face twitched, clearly extremely excited. Han Shinsakura was no longer the tender youth who had followed Sei Gasakai to Luoyang to cultivate. Now, Han Shinsakura's face no longer had the youthful and impetuous look of a mature man. His calm temperament and determined eyes, as well as his sharp facial features, made him look like a lonely man. Even if a huge wave crashed against the shore, it wouldn't move him at all. I'm not crazy, Han Shinsakura said calmly as he sat cross-legged on a mat with his swords placed on his legs. Not crazy. Then you must be out of your mind. Wake up. Your choice determines the lives and futures of tens of thousands of disciples in the Nittinin flying immortal palace. Instead of going to the 6 families, you actually want to go to guide ancient city? Do you know what's going on outside? It's the era of spokespersons now. Even the Zhang and Dugu families, who have always been determined to fight to the death with the alien races, have already accepted the existence of spokespersons. They're doing everything possible to make their disciples become spokespersons. What's in Guide Ancient City? I can tell you with certainty that there's not even a single spokesperson there. You ignored the generous offers from the 6 families and insisted on going to Guide Ancient City. If this isn't crazy, what is? The more the elder spoke, the angrier he became. He wished he could slap Han Shinsakura awake. Zhou is there. Han Shinsakura's expression didn't change as he said calmly, Zhou, no matter how strong Zhou is, he's not a spokesperson. What future can he have? Ignoring Zhou's guide ancient city, even the family in Luoyang that he relies on doesn't have a spokesperson. It will be annexed by others sooner or later. When that happens, we won't even have the right to negotiate with the 6 families. We might even end up as cannon fodder. You are joking with the lives of tens of thousands of disciples of the Nittinin flying immortal palace. I absolutely won't agree. The elders will definitely not agree either. When the elder said that, the few elders standing beside him nodded silently, expressing their support for the elder's opinion. As the dimensional zones overseas became more and more severe, it was difficult for ordinary cultivators to survive at sea. The Nittinin flying immortal palace had no choice but to consider returning to the mainland. Otherwise, it would probably be destroyed in the near future. However, on the question of where to go after returning to the mainland, the current palace lord of the Nittinin flying immortal palace, Han Shinsakura, and the elders had a huge disagreement. The 6 families had once contacted the Nittinin flying immortal palace and expressed their willingness to accept them. They had also offered rather good conditions. The few elders were inclined to choose between the 6 families, but the current palace lord, Han Shinsakura, insisted on going to guide ancient city. Chapter 1667. It's my decision to head to guide ancient city. It's also an order. I'm not discussing it with you, Han Shinsakura said calmly. His tone was extremely calm, but it was as if a barrel of gasoline had been ignited. It wasn't just the elder who had argued with Han Shinsakura. The other elders also revealed looks of indignation. All of them spoke up. Some cursed, some persuaded, and some gave Han Shinsakura pointers as a senior. The meaning behind their words was to tell Han Shinsakura not to be stubborn. Otherwise, it would definitely harm the tens of thousands of disciples of the Nittinin flying immortal palace. It might even destroy the foundation that Sei Gasakai had painstakingly established. Looking at the elders who were spitting saliva, Han Shinsakura was just about to say something when he suddenly saw a female swordsman in white walk in. Hence, he shut his mouth and looked at the female swordsman. "Elders, can you listen to me?" The female swordsman said to the elders. "Shiraishi Satomi, you came just in time. Quickly persuade your senior brother. He's going to ruin the foundation that Lord Sword Sage has painstakingly established. When the elders saw the female swordsman, their eyes immediately lit up. They invited her to join their camp and persuade Han Shinsakura. Say Gasakai had many disciples, but only Han Shinsakura and Shiraishi Satomi could truly obtain his teachings. Although Han Shinsakura had inherited the position of palatial lord, Shiraishi Satomi's status in the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace was still very high. She had a good relationship with Han Shinsakura, so Han Shinsakura would likely consider her words more seriously. Elders, palatial lord's decision is right. We should head to guide ancient city and not the 6 families. Shiraishi Satomi's words left all the elders dumbfounded. Shiraishi Satomi, why are you going crazy with palatial lord? The elders looked at Shiraishi Satomi in puzzlement. I'm not crazy. Palatial lord isn't crazy either. Guide ancient city is our best choice, not the 6 families, Shiraishi Satomi said firmly. Why? The elders were even more puzzled. They really couldn't think of any reason not to choose the 6 families and instead choose a tiny guide ancient city that was under the family. Because Zhou is there. When she said this, Shiraishi Satomi's eyes seemed to shimmer. The elders were stunned. This was the second time they had heard that sentence today. First, Han Shinsakura had given such an answer, and now, Shiraishi Satomi had given the same answer. The 2 mainstays of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace had given such an answer. It was truly unbelievable. Zhou is indeed a figure. There are rumors in the outside world that he's the Thief King, ignoring the fact that he might not be the Thief King. Even if he really is the Thief King, not being chosen by the dimension only proves that his potential is limited. It's not worth it for us to bet the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace's foundation on him. An elder persuaded. Third elder is right. Besides, what sort of place is Guide Ancient City? The strange dimensional zones were everywhere, and the environment was no better than at sea. In fact, it was even more terrifying. In the future, the dimensional zones would be breached on a large scale, and the situation would be even more difficult than at sea. Isn't it the same as entering the tiger's den after leaving the wolf's den? Absolutely not. Even if we're considering going to guide Ancient City, we should directly contact the family in Luoyang. Wouldn't we be lowering ourselves to guide Ancient City just like that? Guide Ancient City is definitely not a good place. The elders began to persuade Shiraishi Satomi again. No matter how good the relationship between Shiraishi Satomi, Han Shinsakura, and Zhou was, they didn't believe that it was a place worth betting the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace's foundation. What if Zhou is human emperor? Shiraishi Satomi suddenly said. The elders who were spitting saliva fell silent as they stared at Shiraishi Satomi as though they were frozen. They even forgot to close their mouths. What did you just say? An elder felt that he must have heard wrongly as he asked Shiraishi Satomi. If Zhou is human emperor, is it worth entrusting him to us? Shiraishi Satomi asked. Shiraishi Satomi, don't spout nonsense just to convince us. When human emperor killed Tian, Zhou wasn't even 20. He wasn't even fully grown. How can he be human emperor? That's right. Zhou can't be human emperor. Don't think that you can fool us and make us agree to go to guide Ancient City. Even if Zhou is really human emperor, he hasn't been chosen by the dimension. It's still unknown if he can fight the spokesperson. Furthermore, it's difficult for 2 fists to fight 4 hands. Shiraishi Satomi was taken aback. She originally imagined that as long as she told the elders the secret that Zhou was human emperor, she would definitely obtain their support, but she never expected such an outcome. Shiraishi Satomi was momentarily at a loss for words as she looked at Han Shinsakura with a bitter smile. Han Shinsakura had long guessed that this would happen, so he hadn't revealed the secret that Zhou was human emperor. Firstly, it was useless, and secondly, it could easily cause trouble for Zhou. Elders, do you know why the sword Dao created by my master is called the Nitin Flying Immortal Ryu, and why our place is called the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace? Han Shinsakura said slowly when he saw Shiraishi Satomi's pleading gaze. Sword Sage once said that he received guidance from an expert, which is why he was able to create the Nitin flying immortal Ryu. As for why it's called the Nitin flying immortal Ryu, he didn't say. An elder said after some thought. The Nitin flying immortal palace didn't discriminate in education. Most of its disciples were actually recruited from other factions. There weren't many disciples who were truly taught by, say, Gasakai, especially in recent years, as the living environment overseas was getting worse. Many small factions had joined the Nitin flying immortal palace in hopes of obtaining, say, Gasakai's protection. Most of these elders were lords of a faction in the past, not, say, Gasakai's fellow disciples. You're right. Master did receive guidance from an expert to create the Nitin flying immortal Ryu. Back then, I was only a teenager. I followed Master to the mainland to cultivate and met a peerless expert in Luoyang's peony garden. Han, Shinsakura said. I know about this. It was before the Nitin flying immortal palace was established. Lord Sword Sage had traveled to the mainland. At that time, Lord Sword Sage had already reached a bottleneck in his sword Dao. He was only half a step away from creating the Nitin flying immortal Ryu sword Dao. As he encountered that expert and was defeated, he gained some insight. After returning, he created the Nitin flying immortal Ryu. Palace Lord, you should be talking about that time, right? The yellow-faced elder recalled. Han Shinsakura nodded slightly. That's right. Do you know who the person master and I met was? Naturally, it's a highly respected senior, the yellow-faced elder said. What if I say that the person we met was only a 15 or 16-year-old youth who was about the same age as me? Han Shinsakura's gaze swept across everyone's faces as he enunciated each word. Impossible, the elders shouted in unison. They naturally refused to believe such a thing. A 15-year-old youth had defeated, say, Gasakai, who was already a half-step sword sage back then. This was simply a fantasy. Why is it impossible? A voice sounded from outside. Everyone was overjoyed when they heard the voice. They looked out the door and saw, say, Gasakai slowly walking in. Chapter 1668. Lord Sword Sage. Master, the group of elders, Han Shinsakura, Shiraishi Satomi, and company stood up and bowed. Although, say, Gasakai had already passed the position of Nitin flying immortal palace's palatial lord to Han Shinsakura, just the name, say, Gasakai held extremely high prestige in the Nitin flying immortal palace and even overseas. Lord Sword Sage, you have to take care of this matter. You can't watch the palatial lord lead the Nitin flying immortal palace onto a path of no return because of his own selfishness. The few elders hurriedly recounted Han Shinsakura's decision to lead the Nitin flying immortal palace to guide ancient city to, say, Gasakai, who had just returned. Say, Gasakai waved his hand to stop the elders from continuing. Then, he said, Sakura is the palace lord of the Nitin flying immortal palace. He has the right to make any decision. But the elders were anxious. They wanted to argue, but they were stopped by, say, Gasakai. Say, Gasakai looked at the elders and said indifferently, Furthermore, I also believe that Sakura's decision is correct. Joining Guide Ancient City is far more correct than joining the 6 families. The elders never expected, say, Gasakai to say that. They were momentarily dumbfounded, unsure of what to say. Say, Gasakai continued. Just as Sakura said, back when we traveled to Luoyang, I was filled with ambition. I believed that my sword Dao was enough to challenge Sunset College's Lung Zongjing, but not long after I arrived in Luoyang, I encountered Zhouwen. Back then, Zhouwen was only 15 or 16 years old, but I lost to him. The reason why the sword Dao I created is called the Nitin Flying Immortal Ryu is because this sword Dao was gained from Zhouwen's transcendent flying immortal. It can be said that Zhouwen is my master. If these elders hadn't believed Han Shinsakura's words, they no longer had any doubts after hearing, say, Gasakai say it personally. All of them were tongue-tied, unable to say a word. Zhouwen has extraordinary talent. With a pure human body, he is cultivated to an unparalleled realm. He's definitely not someone who relies on external forces to raise his strength in a short period of time. He will definitely shock the world in the future. Furthermore, there are many people under the 6 families. If we go now, we will only be one of them. Guide Ancient City was in need of manpower, so it was a good opportunity to head there. Sakura's thoughts are all for the sake of the Nidden Flying Immortal Palace. She's not selfish at all. Everyone, don't be suspicious. Gasakai swept his gaze across the elders' faces. The elders could not help but lower their heads. We will listen to Palace Lord's instructions. The elders turned around and bowed to Han Shinsakura. Han Shinsakura's expression remained unchanged. There were no ripples in his eyes. He still didn't take what had just happened to heart. His gaze was distant, as if the focus of his gaze was no longer in front of him. Zhou, I'm coming. My sword will surprise you. Don't disappoint me. Achoo! Zhou, who was gaming on his phone, sneezed. After rubbing his nose, he continued focusing on the game. In the game, the blood-colored avatar's entire body was enveloped by the crystal-like Chaos Egg. As for the golden light that shot out from the 3-faced Buddha's eyes in the temple hall, it enveloped the entire Chaos Egg. The golden light penetrated the Chaos Egg and dyed it golden. Now, the Chaos Egg had reached the peak of the Hell stage and was almost about to break through to the Heaven stage. When the Chaos Egg at the Mortal stage was being beaten, it could convert the enemy's strength into Essence Energy Crystals. Furthermore, Essence Energy Crystals could be stacked. At most, 10,000 Essence Crystals could be stacked into one Essence Crystal. The Chaos Egg at the Hell stage had an even greater increase in this stacking ability. The highest number of stacks reached 100 million before it couldn't be increased any further. With the Chaos Egg's current Essence Energy capacity, it could only last less than 20 seconds under the 3-faced Buddha's golden light. Furthermore, no matter how the Chaos Egg was destroyed, it couldn't grow like before. Zhou clearly felt that the Chaos Egg was just a little short of breaking through to the Heaven stage, but for some reason, he felt that something was missing. It was difficult for him to truly enter the Heaven stage. What exactly is missing? Seeing the game screen turn black again, he still didn't gain anything. The Chaos Egg didn't grow at all. He couldn't help but frown in thought. Zhou now knew very well that it was impossible to help the Chaos Egg advance to the Heaven stage by relying on mechanical suicidal cultivation. He had to figure out the key to advancing. I'm hungry. As Zhou was pondering, demonic Neonate walked to Zhou side with a demonic sword in her arms. She looked up into Zhou eyes and said seriously, Hungry? Zhou was first taken aback. After snapping to his senses, he sized up demonic Neonate in surprise. Many companion beasts would be hungry. If they were hungry for too long, they might even dissipate. The most typical example was Tyrant Behemoth. If there was no food for an extended period of time, Tyrant Behemoth might starve to death. It was only because Zhou had the resources in the game dungeons and an Essence Energy art like the Chaos Egg that could convert Essence Energy Crystals that he could nurture so many high-level companion beasts. If it were any ordinary person, most of them would starve to death, even if they were given a bunch of mythical pets. However, demonic Neonate was different. She was very picky. There were very few food that caught her eye. Even high-level Essence Crystals were beneath her notice. Even Calamity-grade companion eggs were beneath demonic Neonate. It could be said that demonic Neonate ate the least among Zhou's top companion beasts. Every time she ate, she would eat some strange things. She usually didn't eat, nor had he heard her say that she was hungry. Now that demonic Neonate had taken the initiative to say that she was hungry, Zhou jumped in fright. This was because he didn't know if he had anything demonic Neonate wanted to eat. After carefully sizing up demonic Neonate, she still looked the same. She looked like a cute and cold spellswordsman girl. She wasn't much different from usual, but after taking a careful look, Zhou realized that demonic Neonate was indeed different. Demonic Neonate's pupils usually looked black, but in fact they weren't black. They were an extremely deep purple color, so thick that it made people mistake them for black. However, demonic Neonate's pupils had become very faint, turning into a grayish-purple color. The grayish-purple color gave off a feeling of decline and loneliness. If one looked at it for too long, they would feel as though they would be sucked in. Little neonate, what do you want to eat? Joan took out the high-level companion eggs, essence energy crystals, and origins he had collected and placed them on the bed for demonic neonate to choose. Demonic neonate swept her gaze across the items, but she only shook her head slightly. Joan took out many more items, but they were similarly rejected by demonic neonate. Could it be that I can only use little neonate's food reserves? Joan rummaged through his belongings, but he didn't find anything that demonic neonate wanted to eat. He couldn't help but think of Grim Demon. When demonic neonate saw Joan's eyes darting around her demonic sword, she immediately understood what Joan was thinking. She shook her head and said, "It's not enough." Unfortunately, Grim Demon couldn't sense the situation outside without unsheathing the demonic sword. Otherwise, he would probably fight Joan to the death. End of this chapter. Chapter 1669. My dear Grandaunt, you aren't eating anything. You will starve to death sooner or later if you're so picky. Joan was depressed, but he didn't say that to demonic neonate. Instead, he thought about it. Little neonate, do you have anything you want to eat? Joan squatted in front of demonic neonate and asked as he stroked her head. Demonic neonate thought for a moment before turning to walk out. Joan hurriedly followed. It had been days since he went out, so he found the sunlight a little blinding when he walked out of the room. Joan lived in a courtyard house in the northwest corner of the ancient city. Such courtyards were everywhere in Guide Ancient City, so they weren't eye-catching. In fact, there were many courtyards that were bigger than this one. As the current owner of the ancient city, Joan could have chosen a better place. The reason he didn't do so was because this seemingly inconspicuous courtyard house actually had something strange about it. Every building in the ancient city was almost an independent space. Joan had already explored most of the buildings, and there were only a few places he hadn't found a way to enter. For example, the town god's temple, the bell tower, and some strange large courtyards. He temporarily couldn't find a way to enter them. Although he could enter this small courtyard, there were some strange things that Joan still couldn't figure out. On the one hand, he lived here to explore the secrets of the small courtyard, and on the other hand, he was afraid that something would happen here. If something really happened, he could suppress it in time. The courtyard wasn't big, and the building itself wasn't anything special. However, there was a well in the courtyard. On special days, he could hear the sound of bubbling water coming from the well. The sound of water in the well sounded very normal. It wasn't strange for wells with flowing water or underground springs to have water sounds. In fact, it wouldn't be strange even if a dimensional creature produced sounds in the well. The strange thing about this well was that there was no water in it. It was strange to hear the sound of water in the middle of the night. Joan had once sent his companion beasts down to explore, but they didn't discover anything. The ancient well wasn't deep to begin with, so Joan could see to the bottom at a glance. The bottom was dry soil that had been there for years. There was no moisture at all, much less water. Every time there was the sound of water, Joan would look down the well, but the outcome was the same. All he could see was the soil at the bottom of the well, but not a single trace of water. However, the sound of gushing water was clear in his ears. It wasn't just Joan. Anyone who walked into the yard could hear it. Joan had once dug the bottom of the well, but no matter how deep he dug, he didn't discover anything. Furthermore, the soil that was dug out would disappear after a period of time. The hole in the well would return to its original state as though it had never been touched. How could Joan be at ease with such a strange, ancient well in such a manner? All he could do was stay here. If anything happened, he could deal with it in time. However, after such a long period of time, although the ancient well would often produce the sound of water in the middle of the night, there were no other abnormalities. Therefore, Joan hadn't deliberately studied the ancient well recently. After the demonic infant came out of the house, she came to the side of the ancient well and jumped onto the edge of the well. She stretched her head out and looked into the ancient well. After looking at it for a while, the demonic infant looked up at Joan. She held the demonic sword in one hand and pointed into the ancient well. At the same time, she said down, There's nothing at the bottom of this ancient well. I dug more than 1,000 meters deep, but I didn't see anything. As Zhou spoke, he came to the side of the ancient well and looked inside. He knew that the demonic infant wouldn't speak without reason. Just like before, he could see the bottom of the well at a glance. There was nothing down there. The demonic infant looked down at the well again. After a while, she suddenly said, "The thing is down there." "Where is it?" Zhou focused his gaze and even summoned Dr. Darkness to fuse with him. He used his eyes of penetration to look down, but he still didn't see anything. The demonic infant frowned in thought, as though she didn't know how to explain. After some thought, she suddenly reached out and plucked the Swana from her waist. Typical companion beasts didn't know how to use weapons. Even if some companion beasts used weapons, they were connate companion weapons. However, demonic infant was different. The weapons on her were basically snatched from others. The demonic sword, heaven-shrouding bell, and Swana were all snatched. However, apart from the demonic sword, demonic infant rarely used the heaven-shrouding bell and Swana. Demonic infant placed the Swana in front of her tiny mouth and puffed her cheeks. She was about to blow the Swana. "Don't blow." Zhou jumped in fright as he hurriedly reached out to hug demonic infant. With his other hand, he covered her tiny mouth to prevent her from blowing out the air. The moment the Swana sounded, it was either joy or sorrow. Zhou could withstand the Swana's magic, but the many ordinary people in Guide Ancient City probably couldn't. It wouldn't be good if the entire city was in mourning. With Zhou covering demonic infant's mouth, she couldn't breathe out. Her cheeks puffed up as her eyes widened. She reached out to pull away the hand that covered her mouth and exhaled. She stared at Zhou and said, "Don't blow. The thing down there won't come out. What's down there?" Zhou really couldn't tell what was down there. He was truly curious as he stared into demonic infant's eyes and asked, "Food." Demonic infant answered with certainty. "What kind of food?" Zhou nearly vomited a mouthful of blood. All he could do was patiently continue asking. "I don't know. It's just food." Demonic infant answered very straightforwardly. Zhou was depressed, but he knew that he couldn't get anything out of her. He pointed at the Swana in demonic infant's tiny hand and said, "You can blow this thing, but is there any way to prevent its sound from affecting the others in the city?" "Sure." Demonic infant tilted her head and thought for a moment before nodding. Zhou heaved a sigh of relief and released demonic infant. "Keep blowing. I also want to know what's in this ancient well." Demonic infant placed the Swana by her lips again and puffed up her cheeks to blow into it. The resounding Swana's sound was earth-shattering. It penetrated deep into one's soul as though it wanted to take away one's soul. Plop! Zhou legs went limp as he knelt to the ground. His eyes were like pearls as they fell out one after another. "Holy sh*T, didn't you say that it wouldn't affect others?" Zhou words turned into a sobbing tone. He struggled to stand up, but he couldn't. "There's no one else here." Demonic infant's voice sounded in Zhou's mind as she continued blowing the Swana. The demonic and desolate sound constantly entered Zhou's ears, causing his tears to constantly fall. The number of tears he had shed in his life was more than what he had just shed. Zhou was just about to say something when he heard the sound of water surging from the ancient well. The sound of water in the ancient well typically sounded at night. This was the first time it had appeared in broad daylight. Chapter 1670. The demonic infant puffed up her cheeks and played the Swana with all her might. Her face turned red from all the blowing, and fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. The sound of water gurgling in the ancient well was like the sound of a boiling fire. But other than that, there was nothing unusual. Zhou cried miserably by the side. His tears flowed like a trickling stream, and his eyes were bloodshot. He cried so hard that tears of blood were about to flow out. Damn it! If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have stayed in this yard. I was too careless. Zhou was depressed. If he had known this would happen, he would have at least made some preparations. Originally, Zhou had relied on the sigh of the king to prevent him from kneeling. It had a natural restraining effect on the Swana's sound, but to his surprise, the sigh of the king didn't react at all. It caught Zhou off guard. It was too late for him to resist after he fell for it. He pressed his hands to the ground, trying his best to prevent his head from touching the ground. Zhou cried as blood seeped out from the corners of his eyes. However, the ancient well remained silent. Nothing came out. "Little neonate, why don't we try again another day?" Zhou cried as he shouted at demonic neonate. He really couldn't hold on any longer as his forehead was about to touch the ground. At that moment, the ancient well suddenly emitted a bright light. It was as though the well had turned into a huge searchlight. Light spewed out from the well, and after rising several meters high, it scattered like a fountain. Zhou hurriedly held his breath and focused. He circulated all his strength to resist the sound and used Truth Listener's ability to observe the abnormal changes in the ancient well. The water in the ancient well seemed to surge as waves surged out. Soon, Zhou discovered that something was slowly floating out of the rising light that resembled a spring. "That's a skeleton." Zhou was alarmed to discover that a skull first floated out of the light, followed by a skeleton in tattered clothes. Not long after, a complete skeleton floated at the top of the spring-like light. The skeleton maintained a cross-legged posture, its body covered in tattered linen clothes. Its entire body had long since decayed to the point where there was not a single bit of flesh left, but a head of white hair still grew on top of the skull. Hair was supposed to grow on the scalp, and the skull's scalp was long gone. Even if the hair hadn't decayed, it should have fallen off. However, the white hair on the skull was silver and shiny, and there were no signs of it falling off. In addition, there was a necklace around the skeleton's neck that was very eye-catching. It was a necklace made of black metal. The pendant was in the shape of a demon's eye, and in the middle of the demon's pupil was a purple round crystal. Although Zhou was using Truth Listener to listen to the scene, for some reason, he felt that the devil's eye seemed to be staring at him. Apart from that, the skeleton's left hand was still tightly clenched. From the gaps in its fingers, he could see something clenched, but most of it was blocked by the skeleton's hand. He couldn't tell what it was. He could only see through the gaps that it was a small white object. Just as Zhou was still sizing it up, the sound of the Suona suddenly stopped. Demonic Neonate's figure flashed and appeared in front of the skeleton. The sheathed demonic sword in her hand stabbed at the devil's eye necklace around the skeleton's neck. The tip of the sword was aimed at the purple pupil crystal. Clang! The demonic sword collided with the pendant with a crisp sound. The purple crystal emitted a purple light that resembled a black hole, blocking the demonic sword, preventing it from advancing. Demonic Neonate was already exhausted from playing the Suona. At that moment, she unleashed all her strength, causing her body to tremble slightly due to the exhaustion. She gritted her white teeth tightly as her chubby face turned purplish red. Zhou was really afraid that she would shatter all her teeth if she used too much strength. She wouldn't be as cute without her teeth. Zhou didn't know why he could still think so much at such a time. "Help me." Only when demonic Neonate squeezed out 2 words from between her teeth did he react. He immediately leaped up from the ground and summoned the immortal culling sword. He held the sword hilt and condensed the power of immortal slaying. He suddenly pulled the immortal culling sword out of its scabbard and slashed at the necklace on the skeleton's neck. With the power of the immortal culling sword and Zhou's present strength, even a powerful calamity-grade life form couldn't ignore this slash. However, for some reason, Zhou felt that this slash would fail. In an instant, it arrived in front of the skeleton. Just as the immortal culling sword was about to strike the necklace suddenly cracked and slid off the skeleton's neck. Zhou was immediately taken aback as he forcefully stopped the immortal culling sword in his hand from slashing down. An inexplicable palpitation surged in his heart. This palpitation made him subconsciously do so, as though something bad would happen if he really slashed down. Thankfully, Zhou already had some control over the immortal culling sword. If it were like before, he wouldn't have been able to retract it, even if he wanted to. The blade finally stopped a few nanometers away from the skeleton's neck. As the necklace slowly slid down, the light in the ancient well dimmed. Zhou could clearly see that the necklace wasn't really broken. Instead, the clasp on the necklace had opened on its own, causing it to slide down. After the necklace left the skeleton's neck, the purple light on the demon eye converged. The demon's sword had shattered the demon eye pendant, and the purple crystal that was the pupil fell out. The demonic infant pouted and sucked the purple crystal in the air. She directly sucked the purple crystal into her mouth and swallowed it with a gulp. The entire process was completed in one go. Zhou didn't even have the time to size up the purple crystal. The necklace that had been sliced off by demonic neonate fell to the ground. The light in the ancient well completely converged as the skeleton fell as well. Its silver-white hair quickly withered and dissipated. The entire skeleton's body rapidly disintegrated, turning into ashes that scattered in all directions. The dust that fell vanished without a trace before it even touched the ground. Thud! Something fell to the ground. It was the white object in the skeleton's hand. It was a square metal object, slightly larger than a matchbox. On one of the faces of the metal object, there was a white line connected to it like a tiny tail. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Zhou had a nagging feeling that when the skeleton dissipated, it had let go of its hand, allowing the metal object to fall. Zhou looked at the white object, and as he watched, his eyes gradually widened as though he had discovered something unbelievable. End of this chapter. Chapter 1671. Just as demonic neonate swallowed the purple crystal, its grayish-purple pupils immediately deepened in color. Moments later, they turned dark purple. Before Zhou, one could size it up carefully. Demonic neonate automatically transformed into a dark beam of light and returned to Zhou. Zhou sensed that demonic neonate's consciousness was gradually turning blurry. He had experienced this many times before. It was a sign that she was about to evolve. He reached out to pick up the white object on the ground and held it in his hand to observe it. Zhou had definitely never seen this before, but the material of its shell was almost identical to his mysterious phone. Be it color or texture, there was no difference. Zhou took out the mysterious phone and wanted to compare it to see if the two were really made of the same material. To his surprise, just as the mysterious phone touched the white object's line seemed to be attracted by a magnet as it was sucked to the end of the mysterious phone. The mysterious phone's screen automatically lit up, showing a charging battery. Zhou was momentarily speechless as he looked in the direction of the ancient well. His expression kept changing as countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Ever since he obtained the mysterious phone, he had never charged it. The mysterious phone didn't need to be charged, nor did it have a charging port. But now it was being charged. The battery icon on the screen also showed the battery percentage. It only had 1% left. Zhou didn't know the difference between the mysterious phone being charged and not being charged, but that wasn't what he was most concerned about. Zhou's father had explained the origins of the phone very clearly. It was dug out from an ancient well in Guide Ancient City by Zhou's grandfather, but Zhou's father wasn't too sure which ancient well it was. Looking at the current situation, that thing was clearly something that came with the phone. It was most likely something like a power bank. Could it be that the mysterious phone was dug out from this ancient well? Countless thoughts flashed through Zhou's mind as he looked at the charging phone. His expression turned even more complicated. He thought a possibility. If the mysterious phone was really dug out from this ancient well, then could the skeleton just now be the remains of his grandfather? Zhou had seen the power of the necklace with his own eyes. Even with demonic neonate's strength, it was difficult for her to injure it at all. Zhou roughly estimated that his strike probably couldn't damage the necklace, but when he approached it, the necklace automatically opened. Also, when the skeleton dissipated, it seemed like it had let go of its hand, causing the charger to fall. Also, when he was about to chop down, his heart palpitated. These abnormal situations made Zhou suspect that the skeleton had done it deliberately. If the skeleton was really Zhou's grandfather's remains, everything could be explained. However, Zhou recalled that his grandfather hadn't gone missing. nor had he been buried. He had been cremated when he passed away. The young Zhou Wen had even attended the funeral, so it was unlikely that his remains had been left behind. What's going on? Zhou Wen couldn't figure it out, no matter how he thought about it. The skeleton had already dissipated, so it was impossible to find any clues. Looking at the phone that was charging, Zhou Wen had no choice but to wait for the time being. He wanted to see what would happen after the phone was charged. Perhaps there would be clues when the time came. Is it not just a coincidence that the mysterious phone was dug out from the ancient city? Seeing that the battery had just jumped from 1% to 2%, Zhou Wen picked up the phone and tried to operate it. He realized that the phone couldn't be operated at all. It was stuck at the charging screen. "Old Zhou, what are you doing?" Li Xian shouted as he pushed the door open and walked in. There had been many things happening in Guide Ancient City recently. Zhou Wen had been a hands-off manager, so most of the work was coordinated by Li Xian. "When did you come?" Zhou Wen asked Li Xian. "I just arrived. What's wrong?" Li Xian looked at Zhou Wen in puzzlement. "Did you hear anything or see anything?" Zhou Wen asked again. "Say, are you in this yard? Did a spy barge in?" "I didn't hear or see anything." Li Xian immediately sized up the yard warily, but he didn't discover anything. "No, didn't you see a light rush out from this ancient well?" Zhou Wen recounted the appearance of the skeleton, but he didn't mention the charger. It was difficult to explain. "According to what you said, I should have seen it from afar, but I didn't see anything just now. This Guide Ancient City is indeed a little odd. I wonder if it's a blessing or a curse for us to occupy this place. I hope nothing bad happens." Li Xian paused for a moment before continuing. "There's something I need to discuss with you. Overseas' Nitin Flying Immortal Palace has contacted us. They want to move to our Guide Ancient City. What do you think?" Zhou Wen thought for a moment before recalling, say, Gasikai. After some thought, he said, "Although the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace established by, say, Gasikai is an overseas faction, it hasn't had much conflict with inland. It can be considered to have maintained its neutrality. Furthermore, in this era, be it overseas or inland, they are all part of humanity. We are in need of manpower now. If there's no grudge, there's no harm in taking them in." "I think so too, but there's still a small problem," Li Xian said with a smile. "What small problem?" Zhou Wen asked with a frown. "Nitin Flying Immortal Palace wanted to move inland some time ago. The 6 families and some large factions are very interested in them. They have also come into contact with them and offered pretty good conditions. Even I was tempted when I heard those conditions, but for some reason, they rejected all of them. Furthermore, they took the initiative to contact us and wanted to move to our place. The conditions they raised were far inferior to the conditions given by the 6 families." Li Xian paused to give Zhou Wen some time to digest the information. "Are you suspecting their motives?" Zhou Wen asked. "A little, but that's not the most important thing. Most importantly, the family clan of gods seems determined to obtain the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace. Not only did they actively contact the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace again, but they also offered better conditions. They even used their connections to tactfully express their hope that we can reject the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace." Li Xian recounted the entire matter. "Who did they find?" Zhou Wen asked after some thought. "Your family." Li Xian didn't say it directly. "Then family?" Zhou Wen was slightly taken aback. "Yes, but Brother Shun contacted me and said that there's no need to worry too much. If there's a need, just taking the people from the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace," Li Xian added. When Zhou Wen heard this, he roughly understood that the family clan of gods had definitely exerted pressure on the family. Chapter 1672. "Old Zhou, what do you think we should do?" Li Xian was a fearless person. He didn't mean if he should take in the people from the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace, but he was asking Zhou Wen how to bring the people from the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace back to Guide Ancient City. According to Li Xian, whether the family could withstand the pressure or not depended on them. The problem was that since the family clan of gods was so persistent, they definitely had a motive. They wouldn't easily let Han Shinsakura and, say, Gasikai bring them to Guide Ancient City safely. "I'll pick them up," Zhou Wen said after some thought. "All right. Since you have nothing better to do, it's good to go out and take a look," Li Xian said with a smile. He wanted to pick them up himself, but Guide Ancient City had just been established. There were too many things he needed to do. Zhou was also a hands-off boss, so Li Xian really couldn't leave. When I'm not around, pay more attention to the matters in the city, Zhou said as he packed his things. I didn't stop paying attention when you were around, Li Xian said with a twitch of his lips. Zhou thought about it and agreed. He really didn't worry about the matters in the city. It was all Li Xian's work. Then let's put it this way. I'll reply to Han Shinsakura. He's still waiting, Li Xian said as he walked out without chatting with Zhou. Zhou packed his things and looked at his phone that was charging. He realized that the battery had reached 3%. He estimated the time. At this rate, it would take more than a day to fully charge it. Before the overseas Nitin Flying Immortal Palace received Zhou's reply, they had already begun mobilizing for the relocation. Moving more than 10,000 people inland was definitely not a trivial matter. There were too many aspects that needed to be taken care of. Dozens of ships advanced inland under the pull of whale-like companion beasts. From the looks of it, our luck isn't bad. We didn't encounter any particularly terrifying marine dimensional creatures. Shiraishi Satomi couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when she saw the coastline from afar. There were many dimensional zones at sea that had been broken. From time to time, terrifying dimensional creatures would appear. Even the safe route they had taken in the past couldn't guarantee absolute safety. It was a good omen to be able to reach inland without any danger. Sometimes, the terrifying ones aren't the dimensional creatures, Han Shinsakura said calmly as he stood at the bow of the ship. Don't worry, Palace Master. We've already planned the route inland. We've also taken care of everything along the way. There won't be any problems, said the yellow-faced elder. Shiraishi Satomi was just about to ask something, but her gaze suddenly froze. She saw a person standing on the pier by the sea. He really came. Han Shinsakura also saw that person. He seemed to have expected it and wasn't surprised. He from the clan of gods? Why is he here? The yellow-faced elder's expression changed. The other elders were also shocked. It was impossible for He to come to the seaside for no reason. He's reputation was so great that he was one of the top humans. Even in the era when there were so many representatives, his ranking on the Rubik's Cube had never dropped out of the top 3. The most terrifying thing was that up to now, no one had been able to find He's weakness. He was very strong and could easily kill calamity creatures. What was even more terrifying was that no one could injure him. Injuring he was equivalent to injuring oneself. He would be fine, but they would die. Everyone, please wait a moment. Who was dressed in black, stood by the sea. His face was angular, making him look like a beautiful marble sculpture. Dozens of large ships stopped in front of the pier. A gigantic whale-like companion beast floated on the sea, glaring at the tiny human figure. Why are you blocking our path? The yellow-faced elder asked Emohi. I've never thought of blocking your path. I'm here to guide you, Emohi said calmly. I wonder what path you are going to guide us to, the yellow-faced elder asked with a frown. Survival, Emohi said indifferently. Everything under the sky is divine land. Only the children of God can live on divine land. If you aren't a citizen of God, how can you survive? Isn't the clan of gods too overbearing? If we don't join the clan of gods, will you not allow us to step foot on the land? The yellow-faced elder's expression turned ugly. No. Emohi shook his head and said, be it the sea or the land, they are all divine lands. If we don't have the blessings of God, there's no place for us to stand no matter how big the world is. We can only sink. The disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace heard him clearly as their expressions changed drastically. Emohi had made it clear that if they didn't join the clan of gods, they would probably be buried in the sea today. If someone else had said such words, they would only treat it as a joke. However, they had already seen Emohi's horror on the Magic Cube's livestream. He had the right to say such words. Is there only one way? Han Shinsakura finally spoke as he stared at Emohi with a burning gaze. Only one way, Emohi answered with certainty. Han Shinsakura didn't say anything else. All he did was silently pull out 2 katanas, one long and one short. His aura constantly converged as he stared at Mo, he like an abyss. The disciples of the Nittanen flying immortal palace on the dozens of ships also summoned their companion beasts and drew their weapons to point at Emohi. The huge companion beasts in the sea roared in unison, stirring up raging waves as though they were about to devour Emohi. Emohi stood there motionless, as though he hadn't seen the shocking, killing intent. He was like a god that looked down on all living beings. Looking at Emohi's lofty posture, Han Shinsakura smiled. He looked at Emohi and said indifferently, "Emohi, your strength is indeed very strong and magical, but if I don't touch you, your strength won't be of any use." With that said, Han Shinsakura ordered the ship to sail to the dock and not attack Emohi. Hundreds of whale-like companion beasts roared as they split the water and waves and swam towards the dock. Emohi wasn't alarmed or happy. He looked at the behemoths and ships that were rushing over and slowly raised his right palm towards the sea. When he faced the sea, he clenched his fingers tightly. Boom! Boom! The sounds of explosions rang incessantly. Hundreds of whale-like behemoths seemed to be gripped tightly by an invisible hand. Their bodies were squeezed until they deformed and instantly exploded. None of the behemoths that were pulling the ship were spared. Blood instantly dyed the entire sea, turning the seawater blood red. As the waves churned, it looked like an azure blood sea. The waves that were filled with blood slammed against the ship and splashed onto the disciples of the Nittanen flying immortal palace. Everyone felt as though they had fallen into a demonic realm. They were so frightened by the scene in front of them that they lost their ability to think. They stood there in a daze, their faces filled with horror. Everyone looked at Emohi as though they were looking at a devil from hell. They trembled uncontrollably as the timid Nittanen flying immortal palace disciples involuntarily retreated. Chapter 1673. Han Shinsakura stared at Mo and couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Although he had the determination to fight to the death, he couldn't draw his sword. If it was an ordinary opponent, even if their strength was far above his, Han Shinsakura would still have the courage to fight. However, Mo was different. Only he could kill, but others couldn't kill him. Even if Han Shinsakura could slash the sun and moon, he couldn't slash Mo. Otherwise, he would only injure himself. Instantly, Han Shinsakura was in a dilemma. Must you do this? Sei Gasakai walked out of the cabin and stared at Mo. When Mo saw Sei Gasakai, he beamed. He looked at Sei Gasakai and said, "I heard that you have the title of Sword Sage overseas. The Nittanen flying immortal Ryu is also known as the best sword Dao overseas." "It's just a favor from my friends," said Sei Gasakai with a frown. "That's probably the case." Emohi nodded. These words immediately infuriated the disciples of the Nittanen flying immortal Ryu. Perhaps Sei Gasakai wasn't the strongest human on earth, but his sword Dao realm was like a saint in the hearts of the Nittanen flying immortal Ryu disciples. A warrior can be killed, but not humiliated. "Mo, I want to fight you," Han Shinsakura said with a gloomy expression. "You're not qualified." Mo didn't even look at Han Shinsakura as he said to Sei Gasakai, "Since you are known as the overseas sword sage, I believe you might have some real talent. Then, I'll give you a chance. I'll only fight you with sword techniques and suppress my strength to the same range as yours. If you can take 3 strikes from me without being defeated, I'll let you come and go freely. If you lose, the Nittanen flying immortal palace will have to join my family clan of gods. Do you dare to agree?" Sei Gasakai knew very well that it was impossible for things to end peacefully today. If he agreed, there was still hope. If he did not agree, the Nittanen flying immortal palace would probably be doomed. Moreover, Sei Gasakai was very confident in his own sword Dao. Putting aside the difference in their levels, he did not think that he was inferior to Mo in terms of sword Dao realm. He did not believe that he could not even withstand 3 strikes. "Can your words represent the family of gods?" Sei Gasakai looked at Mo and asked, "If I say you can leave, No one from the family of gods will dare to touch you again. Of course, the prerequisite is that you, the Sword Saint, can withstand 3 of my attacks without being defeated. His goal was to bring the Nitin flying immortal palace back to the family clan of gods, not to kill. He had only killed the companion beasts that were pulling the boat to intimidate everyone. All right, 3 swords to decide the winner. Say, Gasakai's mind was calm. He was not moved by Mo's words. At the same time, he did not really want to be undefeated in 3 strikes. He just wanted to win. If a swordsman did not have the will to win and only had the mentality of withstanding 3 sword strikes, then he would have already lost. Say, Gasakai summoned his companion beast's twin blades. They were 2 samurai blades, one long and one short. The blades looked the same, with a demonic purple color. There seemed to be a faint sanguine glow amidst the purple. This pair of sabers of mine is called Ghost Cry and God Howl. They are both growth-type companion beasts. They have already grown to the Calamity grade, 1 level higher than me. I'll use this sword to fight you. You don't have to worry about anything. Just use the strength of a Calamity grade, say Gasakai said. It's just an external object. Mo casually beckoned as seawater surged into his palm like a fountain. Under the effects of the cold air in his palm, it condensed into a sword. Casually shaking the ice sword, Mo said, "Since you are at the Terror grade, I'll suppress my strength to the Terror grade. Withstand 3 strikes for me, and you can go wherever you want." Most of the disciples of the Nitin flying immortal palace wore looks of indignation. Mo's actions were an insult to Sword Saint Sei Gasakai. There are also people secretly rejoicing. They felt that Sei Gasakai's chances of winning had increased, but they were also worried that Mo would not keep his promise. Please, Sei Gasakai's state of mind was as calm as an ancient well. He didn't have any emotional fluctuations because of Mo's words. With sword in hand, he stood above the sea like a mountain. He really does have the demeanor of a sword saint. Mo nodded slightly as his eyes turned serious. The ice sword in his hand stabbed at Sei Gasakai. It was completely different from the aura of crushing hundreds of companion beasts with one hand. His strike was ordinary and simple. It could even be said that it was ridiculously ordinary. No sword aura or sword beam appeared. The sword thrust was very slow, so slow that it made people feel like he was joking. Mo was still standing on the dock, at least hundreds of meters away from Sei Gasakai. When he stabbed out with his sword, his feet didn't move as he remained standing on the dock. However, for some reason, the sword tip that was slowly thrusting out seemed to be approaching Sei Gasakai. It wasn't just Sei Gasakai. Everyone who was watching the battle felt as though the sword was stabbing towards their hearts. Those who weren't resolute turned pale in fright as they involuntarily retreated. However, no matter how they retreated, the feeling that the sword tip was about to stab into their hearts lingered. It was as though their hearts would be pierced in the next second. When Han Shinsakura and Shiraishi Satomi saw this strike, their expressions turned abnormally solemn. They all knew that it was very difficult to train one's sword technique quickly. The faster the sword, the easier it was to kill. However, as long as one persisted in practicing, the sword would eventually become faster. It was just a matter of how much faster it was. However, to train one's sword slowly, it wasn't something that could be learned through practice alone. One had to have extremely high talent in the way of the sword and have an epiphany. Only then would it be possible to train one's sword slowly. Mo's slow sword was clearly not as simple as being slow. Its realm was so high that even Han Shinsakura's heart skipped a beat. The sword slowly stabbed over. It looked like it was easy to resolve, but when one really wanted to resolve it, they realized that there was no way to do so. This was because he was too slow. No matter how one dealt with it, one would only expose one's intentions to the other party. In a situation that was originally one of stillness, one suddenly realized that one had become the one moving. However, if one didn't resolve the slow sword, the sword would slowly stab over like a frog in warm water. Once one entered the other party's killing range, it would be impossible for the other party to resolve it. It was wrong to move, but it was also wrong to not move. Say Gasikai immediately fell into a dilemma. Those who knew how terrifying this strike was were worried for Say Gasikai, but Say Gasikai didn't panic. Without any hesitation, he slashed at Mo with Ghost Weep. His blade wasn't slow at all. On the contrary, it was so fast that it appeared in front of Mo in an instant. Amazing! Hanshin Sakura couldn't help but exclaim. This was the most authentic Nidden flying immortal Ryu. The long blade slashed at the enemy while the short blade protected him. The combination of movement and stillness was like the rotation of yin and yang. It was the only way to break the slow sword, but it was only limited to, say, Gasekai's realm. The terrifying saber beam brought with it by Ghost Weep had already slashed in front of Mo. If Mo continued thrusting forward, his sword would be blocked by God's Howl. If he retracted his sword and dodged, he would immediately fall into a passive situation. Not to mention 3 strikes. Even 300 strikes or 3,000 strikes would probably not be able to defeat, say, Gasekai. Moa didn't retreat, nor did he have any intention of retracting his sword. He actually used the ice sword condensed from seawater to meet, say, Gasekai's calamity-grade Ghost Weep. Is he going to break his promise? Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. How could an ice sword condensed from seawater resist a calamity-grade companion beast weapon unless Mo used his calamity-grade strength? However, when the sword and saber clashed, Mo didn't use his calamity-grade strength. The ice sword was shattered without any suspense. Everyone was overjoyed, but the next moment, everyone's faces turned ashen. They stood rooted to the spot, unable to believe what they had seen. When the saber and sword clashed, Mo's ice sword was shattered. However, his sword was condensed from seawater. The shattered ice sword melted into water, and as Mo's sword continued forward, it condensed into a sword again and pointed at, say, Gasekai's chest. Everything has its own characteristics. The Tao of mutual promotion and restraint lies in one's heart. To not even comprehend this, it looks like the Nitten flying immortal Ryu is nothing much, Mo said indifferently. Chapter 1674. You have lost. Bring the disciples of the Nitten flying immortal palace and return to the family clan of gods with me. And Mohi released his palm as the ice sword in his hand turned into a stream of water that returned to the sea. The faces of the Nitten flying immortal palace disciples were ashen. With, say, Gasekai's abilities, he had failed to withstand a single strike. When Mo, he had suppressed his strength to the same level as him. Furthermore, say Gasekai had used the calamity-grade, ghost-wailing, god-howling blade. This made them doubt, say, Gasekai's sword Tao. Say Gasekai was rendered speechless. There was nothing more to say after such a thorough defeat. And Mohi turned around and was about to leave, but he saw that not far behind him, there was a young man standing there. That young man was quietly sizing him up with a look of interest, which made Mohi frown. The youth was less than 100 meters away from him. At such a distance, he hadn't sensed his arrival at all. Just this point was enough to surprise him. Mr. Zhou, when, say, Gasekai saw Zhou Wan, he said guiltily, "I'm sorry. I lost just now. I can only head to the family clan of gods according to the agreement." Mr. Chi, don't take it to heart. Zhou smiled and said to Mohi, "The family clan of gods is a huge family. I believe they won't snatch a guest from me." Mohi looked at Zhou Wan and said, "That will depend on whether you have the ability to invite guests. You said that the Nitten flying immortal Tao is nothing much. I wonder if you dare to make a pact of 3 strikes with me?" Zhou Wan said without batting an eyelid. The King of Thieves lives up to his name. He really has a deep-rooted thieving nature. He said sarcastically. The matter of Zhou, when being the King of Thieves, was no longer a secret among the 6 families. Before he became a spokesperson. He had seen Zhou Wan's battle through the Rubik's Cube, so he naturally didn't dare underestimate him. He dared to make a pact of 3 strikes with, say, Gasekai, but he didn't dare say such words to Zhou Wan. It wasn't that he believed that Zhou Wan was stronger than him. It was just that the King of Thieves had displayed powerful spatial powers. Even if Zhou Wen only dodged, he wasn't confident that he could defeat him in 3 strikes. Furthermore, he was able to defeat, say, Gasikai in 1 strike, not because his sword Dao realm was much stronger than, say, Gasikai's, but because he had studied the Nitten flying Immortal Ryu's sword Dao before he came. He had also gathered a large amount of information about, say, Gasikai. It could be said that he knew, say, Gasikai like the back of his hand, which allowed him to defeat with 1 strike. Was his style. There was a lot of information on Zhou Wen in the family clan of gods, but they couldn't fully understand Zhou Wen through the information. At the very least, he believed that the information wasn't everything about Zhou Wen. You misunderstand me. I'm not asking you to defeat me in 3 strikes. Zhou Wen shook his head. So, you want me to take 3 of your sword strikes? He's face turned cold, and he couldn't help but feel some anger in his heart. Ever since he became the spokesperson, he had never been looked down upon like this. Although Zhou Wen was known as the King of Thieves, that was only in the past. He didn't think that Zhou Wen was qualified to say such things to him now. Of course not. Zhou Wen shook his head again. Upon hearing Zhou Wen's words, He's expression eased a little. He looked at Zhou Wen and said, "Then what do you mean by the pact of 3 strikes?" Zhou Wen didn't answer him. All he did was wave at Han Shinsakura. "Come over and help me." Han Shinsakura was taken aback when he heard that. He didn't know what Zhou Wen was up to, but he still walked over to Zhou Wen's side. "Master, why did Zhou Wen get Han Shinsakura to go?" Shiraishi Satomi asked, say, Gasikai in puzzlement. "How can we see through a figure like him? However, Mr. Zhou definitely has his reasons." "Just continue watching," say, Gasikai said. "Sir, what instructions do you have?" Han Shinsakura came in front of Zhou Wen and bowed. "I remember that you're Mr. Qi's disciple. You should have obtained the true teachings of Mr. Qi's Nitten flying Immortal Ryu, right?" Zhou Wen asked Han Shinsakura. He didn't know what Zhou Wen was up to as he watched without a word. "I don't dare say that it's a true teachings. I've been working hard to follow in Master's footsteps," Han Shinsakura answered. "Sakura's sword Dao is about to reach my realm," say, Gasikai said. "That's enough." Zhou Wen nodded in satisfaction. "Zhou Wen, what are you trying to do?" He asked with a frown. "Just now, you said that the Nitten flying Immortal Ryu is nothing much. Then, I'll teach him 3 strikes on Mr. Qi's behalf. It's the same rule as before. If you can take 3 strikes from him without being defeated, you can take them anywhere you want." The moment Zhou Wen said that, everyone was stunned speechless. Everyone had already seen He's strength. Even, say, Gasikai couldn't withstand a single strike. Although Han Shinsakura was a genius, and his sword Dao cultivation level was close to, say, Gasikai's, it was unbelievable that he could defeat He with just 3 strikes. This time, not only did He's expression turn cold, even his eyes turned cold. He stared at Zhou Wen with a burning gaze and said, "You will pay the price for your arrogance. You only need to answer if you want to bet or not," Zhou Wen said indifferently. "All right, I'll grant your wish. However, after that, I will fight you. I originally didn't want to be your enemy, but you are forcing me," He said coldly. "Let's talk after you take 3 strikes from him." As Zhou Wen spoke, he waved his hand at Han Shinsakura. "Lend me your blade. I'll teach you 3 strikes on Mr. Qi's behalf." Although Han Shinsakura had some doubts, he still held the blade in front of Zhou Wen with both hands. Zhou Wen took the katana and casually waved it twice, as though he was familiarizing himself with the center of gravity of the blade. "Master, isn't Zhou Wen being too arrogant?" Shiraishi Satomi said with a strange expression. Although she knew that Zhou Wen was human emperor, it wouldn't be easy for him to defeat He even with the strength the human emperor had displayed in the past. It was unbelievable that teaching Han Shinsakura 3 strikes on the spot would allow him to defeat He. In fact, it wasn't just Shiraishi Satomi. The elders also felt that Zhou Wen might not be too arrogant. Even if he was human emperor, he couldn't underestimate an expert at He's level. Even if Zhou Wen really had such a powerful sword Dao, it was impossible for Han Shinsakura to immediately learn such a profound sword Dao. No matter how talented a swordsman was, it was impossible for him to learn a profound sword technique in such a short period of time. What was even more unacceptable was that Zhou Wen had begun teaching Han Shinsakura's sword techniques in front of Mo He. He had no intention of avoiding them. Is this person really reliable? It wasn't just the elders. Even the ordinary disciples felt that Zhou Wen's actions were a little too childish. To teach 3 strikes in front of others, and even use them to defeat them, was he treating them as idiots? Chapter 1675. Zhou Wen naturally wasn't an unreliable person. He didn't raise such a condition to humiliate Mo He. In fact, when Sei Gasakai and Mo were fighting, he had already arrived. At that time, Sei Gasakai had already agreed to Mo's challenge. It was too late for him to stop it. Therefore, when Sei Gasakai and Mo fought, Zhou Wen activated his teacher domain to observe the extent of Mo's abilities. The teacher domain was a calamity domain derived from the Tao Sutra. The game's introduction was enlightenment domain. Its actual use was to shield other different power laws. At the same time, it could also study the other party's power laws. It could even reconstruct primordial energy arts by studying the other party's power laws. Zhou Wen originally only wanted to study Mo He's power, hoping to figure out what kind of power Mo He's rebound force was. However, when Zhou Wen used the teacher domain to observe, he made an unexpected discovery. This discovery did not originate with Maher, but with Sei Jikai. This was because Sei Gasakai's Nitin flying immortal Ryu had been inspired by Zhou Wen's transcendent flying immortal and immortal slaying. It could be said to be of the same lineage as Zhou Wen's sword Dao. When Sei Gasakai used the Nitin flying immortal Ryu's sword Dao, Zhou Wen discovered the other abilities of Shiryu. In the Shur domain, not only could Zhou Wen clearly sense all the strengths and weaknesses of Sei Gasakai's Nitin flying immortal Ryu, but the Shur domain even automatically modified the flaws of a Nitin flying immortal Ryu, allowing Zhou Wen to gain new insights into the Shur domain's abilities. He could clearly sense that as long as he was willing, he could use Shiryu to make up for the flaws of Sei Gasakai's Nitin flying immortal Ryu. He could even directly raise Sei Gasakai's sword Dao realm. So that's how it is. The so-called enlightenment domain is indeed not as simple as imitating. Zhou Wen came to a realization back then. Sei Gasakai had used the Nitin flying immortal Ryu to fight Mo He in the Shur domain. It was almost equivalent to Zhou Wen fighting Mo He himself. Now, Zhou Wen had already made a judgment of Mo He's sword Dao realm. At the same time, he wanted to test the Shur domain's new ability, so he raised such a condition. Zhou Wen had a vague feeling that Shiryu had already found the path to advancement. Han Shinsakura looked at Zhou Wen and couldn't help but feel nervous. The sword Dao that Zhou Wen imparted was probably very profound. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to defeat Mo. He didn't doubt Zhou Wen's sword Dao standards, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to master the sword technique Zhou Wen had taught him in such a short period of time. Don't be nervous. Just learn a little. Zhou Wen smiled at Han Shinsakura. When others heard this, they felt that Zhou Wen was somewhat arrogant. However, that was the truth. This was because he wanted to use the teacher domain to directly raise Han Shinsakura's sword Dao realm and not really let him learn the 3 strikes. I will do my best, Han Shinsakura said seriously. Then watch carefully. Zhou Wen didn't say anything else. After activating the teacher domain, he began brandishing the saber in his hand. Everyone was attracted by his actions. They wanted to see what peerless sword technique he was going to teach that allowed Han Shinsakura to defeat Mo in such a short period of time. Even in Mo, he couldn't help but focus on Zhou Wen's sword techniques. He also wanted to know how good Zhou Wen's sword Dao was. And Mo, he didn't believe that he would lose to Han Shinsakura. He was already preparing to defeat Zhou Wen after defeating Han Shinsakura. However, the 3 strikes that Zhou Wen taught made everyone widen their eyes. It wasn't because Zhou Wen's sword techniques were profound and powerful, but because they were too simple. It was so simple that all the disciples of the Nidin Flying Immortal Palace could understand them. Even the young disciples at the mortal stage understood the sword techniques that Zhou Wen taught. In fact, it was difficult for them not to understand, even if they wanted to. This was because the sword techniques that Zhou Wen had displayed were the most basic sword techniques of the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu. Even the children in the Nidin Flying Immortal Palace had practiced them countless times. They were extremely familiar with them. "Master, what's going on?" Shiraishi Satomi had already begun to doubt her eyes. She suspected that Zhou Wen had taught her something profound, but she just couldn't understand it. Gasakai was also puzzled. He was also suspecting if Zhou Wen's 3 ordinary strikes contained some profundity. However, he really couldn't tell what was different between the 3 strikes and the basic sword moves of the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu he had created. He frowned. He had focused on studying the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu, so he naturally knew these basic sword moves like the back of his hand. However, he couldn't tell how Zhou Wen could defeat him with these 3 strikes. Ignoring the fact that Han Shinsakura had used these 3 strikes to defeat him, he didn't believe that it would be of any use even if Zhou Wen used these 3 strikes himself. The others didn't sense anything, but Han Shinsakura felt completely different from them. Under the effects of the teacher domain, the 3 ordinary strikes were like 3 bolts of lightning that struck Han Shinsakura's brain. It made Han Shinsakura feel enlightened as many unprecedented Sword Dao experiences exploded in his mind. So the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu I cultivated has so many flaws. So this is the profundity of the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu. I never expected there to be such a realm. In the eyes of others, the 3 simple strikes gave Han Shinsakura 3 epiphanies. Originally, his Sword Dao cultivation level was already close to Gasakai's, but suddenly, with 3 epiphanies, his Sword Dao realm instantly rose to an unbelievable realm. Epiphanies were extremely difficult. A swordsman could become a sword master if he had an epiphany once in his life. For example, Gasakai had an epiphany because of Zhou Wen. He had created the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu and obtained the reputation of a sword sage overseas. Now, Han Shinsakura had 3 consecutive epiphanies. It was an unbelievable, fortuitous encounter. In an instant, his Sword Dao realm had reached a level that even Gasakai found difficult to reach. At that moment, he was pleasantly surprised. He almost couldn't believe that he had such an epiphany. He looked at Zhou Wen as though he was looking at a god. If he wasn't a god, how could he use such a simple 3 strikes to give him such an epiphany? Zhou Wen looked at Han Shinsakura and was equally pleasantly surprised. As Han Shinsakura's epiphany and improvement, his teacher domain also began to improve, evolving from the human stage to the hell stage. Zhou Wen originally believed that by using the teacher domain to educate Han Shinsakura's understanding of the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu should have reached the limit of his comprehension. However, that wasn't the case. After Han Shinsakura experienced 3 epiphanies, the Nidin Flying Immortal Ryu, Sword Dao, he comprehended had already exceeded the scope of the teacher domain. The master leads the way, but the cultivation is up to the individual. The enlightenment of the teacher domain is no longer limited to one's bottleneck. If the enlightenment of the person being enlightened exceeds the teacher domain, it can instead nourish the teacher domain. Zhou Wen had already completely understood the abilities of the teacher domain. Chapter 1676. His sword technique is only SOSO, unless he uses a power above the terror grade. These 3 strikes should be enough for you to defeat him. Zhou Wen threw the saber back to Han Shinsakura. You don't have to use words to agitate me. I said that I would only use the same strength as him, so I won't go back on my word. If I use a power above the terror grade, I will naturally lose, he said coldly. He didn't believe that Han Shinsakura could defeat him with 3 strikes. Zhou Wen didn't comment, but Han Shinsakura suddenly bowed to Zhou Wen and said seriously, "Sir, I'll remember your kindness in imparting the Tao to me. Go." Zhou Wen nodded slightly. Only then did Han Shinsakura stand up and walk towards Mo, he with his saber in hand. The disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace had odd expressions. They really couldn't tell what was so special about Zhou Wen's 3 strikes that was worth Han Shinsakura's bow. Shiraishi Satomi was also puzzled. She looked at Sei Gasakai and asked, "Master, are Zhou Wen's 3 strikes really that magical?" She knew how arrogant Han Shinsakura was. To be able to make Han Shinsakura bow so politely meant that Han Shinsakura treated the other party as an existence like his master. From this, it also meant that the 3 strikes were definitely extraordinary. However, Shiraishi Satomi couldn't tell that the 3 strikes were different from the basic sword moves she had learned in the past. How can a figure like Mr. Zhou speak nonsense? Sei Gasakai couldn't tell what was so special about the 3 strikes, but he could sense that Han Shinsakura's aura had changed. This change didn't look obvious. If Han Shinsakura hadn't been taught by Sei Gasakai, it would have been difficult for him to tell. "Please be careful of my saber." Han Shinsakura stopped opposite Mo. He held the saber Zhou Wen had borrowed in his hand, but he didn't summon the second short saber he often used. The disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Ryu all used dual blades, so Han Shinsakura was naturally the best at dual blades. He only used 1 blade and not 2, not because Zhou Wenjiao only used 1 blade in the 3 strikes, but because Han Shinsakura wanted to avenge Sei Gasakai. Mo had used a water sword to defeat Mo, so he also wanted to use a blade to defeat Mo. Mo looked at Han Shinsakura as a strange glint flashed in his eyes. After all, he was a calamity-grade expert. He could sense the change in Han Shinsakura's temperament, but he still couldn't figure out what Han Shinsakura could learn from the 3 strikes. He had watched Zhou Wen teach the 3 strikes with his own eyes. He really couldn't figure out what the 3 strikes could do. "Don't waste time. Attack." Mo, he casually grabbed and condensed the seawater into a sword again. He looked at Han Shinsakura and said indifferently, "Don't waste time. Attack." Although he knew that Han Shinsakura had grown, Mo didn't believe that Han Shinsakura could grow to the point of defeating him. Even if Zhou Wen had taught Han Shinsakura the sword art of God, it was impossible for him to improve to the point where he could fight him in such a short period of time. Furthermore, the 3 strikes that Zhou Wen had taught him were only the introductory sword techniques of the Nitin Flying Immortal Ryu. In a battle between true experts, confidence was also an important factor. If one didn't have confidence, it would be very difficult to win unless one's strength was truly overwhelming. How could Mo make such a mistake? Han Shinsakura didn't say anything else. He held a saber with 1 hand and slashed at Mo. This strike wasn't one of the 3 strikes that Zhou Wen had taught him, but the one that Sei Gasakai had slashed at Mo. It was almost identical without any difference. Indeed, the 3 strikes that Zhou Wen taught are useless. He is still using Sei Gasakai's sword Dao. Those 3 strikes are just a decoy. However, you have underestimated me, Mo. How can such a small trick succeed in front of me? Moreover, I have just broken the sword style he used. Mo thought to himself. However, the ice sword in his hand did not hesitate and stabbed forward again. The battle between the two was almost a replica of the battle between Sei Gasakai and Mo. The only difference was that Han Shinsakura only had 1 saber in his hand and didn't have the ability to protect himself. This, Shiraishi Satomi was already at a loss for words. Sei Gasakai had already given it a try. This strike was bound to fail, but Han Shinsakura had actually done it again. It wasn't just her. None of the disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace knew what was going on. The elders even wondered if Han Shinsakura's brain was damaged. Only Sei Gasakai seemed to understand something. He shook his head slightly and said with a smile, "This child is quite thoughtful." The ice sword that was advancing at an extremely slow speed collided with the saber that was slashing at him again. The ice sword was shattered once again, and everything was exactly the same as before. It was like a movie remake. Although he was confident, he was still somewhat afraid. Therefore, he held back and was prepared to deal with any unforeseen circumstances. However, nothing unforeseen happened. Han Shinsakura's saber shattered his ice sword. The ice sword fragments turned into water that flowed past Han Shinsakura's saber and condensed into a water sword that pointed at Han Shinsakura's chest. He won, and Mohi naturally couldn't believe that it would go so smoothly. But seeing that the water sword was about to pierce Han Shinsakura's chest, he had no choice but to believe it. Suddenly, Mohi's heart palpitated as though he had sensed some great danger. His eyes focused, and he immediately realized that Han Shinsakura's saber had slashed at his waist at some point in time. His sword and Han Shinsakura's saber could hit each other at almost the same time, but he was only holding a water sword, while Han Shinsakura was holding a Terragray Companion B-Saber. The outcome would be different if they both hit each other. Unless he used a strength that exceeded the Terragrade, he would definitely be the one to suffer. When that happened, he would naturally lose. I thought it was some brilliant sword technique, but it turns out that he just wants to use such a method to defeat me. Isn't he too naive? Mohi's calamity grade, thinking ability, and reaction were naturally not something Han Shinsakura could compare with. At that instant, countless thoughts flashed through Mohi's mind. Almost at the same time, his body naturally moved. His body moved slightly as the water sword in his hand stabbed forward at the same speed. This way, Han Shinsakura's saber would brush past him, and his water sword would hit Han Shinsakura. In fact, this reaction speed had already exceeded the limits of a Terragrade. However, this wasn't a substantial calamity grade power, so it couldn't be said that he had broken the rules. However, after he finished doing all of this, his pupils suddenly constricted as a look of disbelief appeared on his face. It was as though he had seen a ghost. He originally imagined that Han Shinsakura had used all his strength to slash out, but that wasn't the case at all. Han Shinsakura's reaction speed was far inferior to his, so it was impossible for him to keep up with his changes and change his moves. However, Han Shinsakura seemed to have expected him to change his moves. His saber changed midway. This change was completed almost at the same time as Mohi's, and it happened to restrain Mohi's changes. Mohi never expected such a situation to happen. It was as though he had foresight. If he hadn't changed his body and instead stabbed down with his sword, Han Shinsakura would have lost. However, because of his changes, Han Shinsakura had restrained him. At such a close distance, unless he used his calamity grade speed to change again, there was nothing he could do. In just a moment of hesitation, the water sword in Mohi's hand had already been shattered by the saber in Han Shinsakura's hand. The tip of the saber also stopped in front of Mohi's chest. Instantly, there was only the sound of the waves on the sea. Everyone seemed to be petrified as they watched Han Shinsakura point his saber at Mohi's chest. Am I King dreaming? On the ship, someone shouted as though he was sleep-talking. Chapter 1677. Am I still living in a dream? The disciple from the second heaven's flying palace stared with widened eyes, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. With just one strike, Han Shinsakura had actually defeated Mohi, who couldn't be underestimated. It was unbelievable. However, what shocked them the most wasn't that Han Shinsakura had defeated Mohi with one strike, but that Zhou had only taught him 3 simple strikes. Yet, Han Shinsakura's sword Dao had improved by leaps and bounds. Han Shinsakura's sword techniques were originally inferior to Sei Gasakai's. Even Sei Gasakai had been defeated by Mohi with one strike, but now Han Shinsakura was able to defeat Mohi with one strike. This was an unimaginable difference. All the disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace looked at Zhou as though they were looking at a god, or as though they were looking at an immortal pill. It was as though they could immediately ascend to immortality if they swallowed him. The more people understood Han Shinsakura, the more they found it unbelievable. Just like Shiraishi Satomi, she often practiced swordplay with Han Shinsakura. She knew Han Shinsakura's sword Dao very well, but now, she realized that Han Shinsakura's sword Dao was like the sea. She couldn't see through its depths, and it even made her feel insignificant. And all of this was because Zhou had taught him 3 strikes. It was like a miracle. Emohi stared intently at Han Shinsakura. He couldn't believe that Han Shinsakura had become so strong just because Zhou had taught him 3 strikes. However, the truth was right in front of him. He had no choice but to believe it. If Han Shinsakura had such a level long ago, he wouldn't have watched helplessly as Sei Gasakai was defeated without doing anything. Is it because Zhou teaching level is too high, or is it because Han Shinsakura's perception is too terrifying? This thought flashed through Emohi's mind as he instantly gave the answer. Han Shinsakura had followed Sei Gasakai for so many years. If his talent was really that strong, he would have long formed his own faction and surpassed his master. He wouldn't have waited until now to have such a breakthrough. The only explanation was that Zhou's sword Dao was just too powerful. Although, he wasn't willing to believe it. He had to admit that he didn't understand how Zhou had taught him. This made him doubt his realm and standards. Your Excellency has lost. Han Shinsakura retracted his blade and said to Mo, I won't go back on my word. I won't stop anyone from the Nittinin Flying Immortal Palace from going anywhere. With that said, Emohi ignored Han Shinsakura and turned to look at Zhou. He stared at him and said, The King of Thieves indeed lives up to his reputation. He's even stronger than the legends say. I wonder if you dare to fight me? Zhou was filled with joy because with Han Shinsakura's epiphany, his teacher domain had advanced from the human stage to the hell stage. Even Zhou hadn't expected such an advancement speed. At that moment, he was thinking that if he did it a few more times, wouldn't Shiryu be able to easily advance to the heaven realm? In fact, it wasn't as simple as Zhou thought. The reason why Shiryu could directly advance from the human stage to the hell stage was because Han Shinsakura's talent and perceptivity were too powerful. Under the influence of Shiryu, he had 3 epiphanies. His sword Dao had already reached an unbelievable realm. In terms of sword Dao, even a heaven realm swordsman probably didn't have full confidence in defeating Han Shinsakura. It could be said that Han Shinsakura was already a true sword Dao master. If it were an ordinary person with poor talent and perceptivity, it would be hard to say if they could have 1 epiphany, much less 3 times. Sure, you could only impart experience and affect perceptivity, but he wasn't strong enough to forcefully enlighten others. It could be said that Shiryu and Han Shinsakura were mutually beneficial. Furthermore, Han Shinsakura was able to have 3 epiphanies. Apart from his talent, immense pressure was also an important reason. The fate of the Nittinin Flying Immortal Palace rested on his shoulders, giving him the motivation to exceed his own potential. If it were any other time, under the influence of the Shur domain, he might have had 1 or 2 epiphanies, but he might not have had as many as 3. If Zhou wanted to use Shiryu to teach such a person, it wouldn't be that easy. Thankfully, there were many geniuses on Earth. There would be plenty of opportunities in the future. However, there were many geniuses around Zhou that he could make use of. However, there was another problem. Zhou had to have a deep understanding of the Tao they cultivated. Otherwise, Shiryu's abilities would be greatly reduced. Come find me after you advance to the heaven realm. Zhou wasn't too interested in fighting Emohi. After experiencing the 2 battles, Zhou had a rough understanding of Emohi's realm. Emohi's realm was already considered very strong among humans, but it was only very strong. If he wasn't at the calamity grade and didn't have the astonishing ability to reflect damage, it would be impossible for him to be so famous with his realm. These words were practically telling Emohi that his abilities weren't good enough. Go back and train for a few more years. If Zhou had said this when he first arrived, even the disciples of the Nittinin Flying Immortal Palace would have thought that he was too arrogant. However, now that Zhou said that, everyone felt that there was nothing wrong with it. Emohi couldn't even defeat Han Shinsakura, who Zhou had taught him 3 strikes. So how could he be Zhou's match? When Emohi heard Zhou's words, he couldn't help but raise his brows slightly. Perhaps your Sword Dao realm is indeed above mine, but Sword Dao realm isn't the only criterion for determining victory. It looks like you are very confident in your ability to reflect damage, Zhou said calmly. Do you dare or not? Moi said coldly. It has nothing to do with whether I dare or not. What benefits do I get from fighting you? Zhou said with a smile. What benefits do you want? Moi was first taken aback before he asked with a frown. If you lose, tell me why you must let the Nitin flying immortal palace join the family clan of gods, Zhou said. Zhou had always been puzzled by this question. Although the Nitin flying immortal palace was considered a sizable faction, and say Gasikai and Han Shinsakura were considered elites among humans, it didn't seem worthy of their attention. At the very least, there was no need for them to pay such a huge price for the Nitin flying immortal palace, much less be so persistent. Sure, Moi hesitated for a moment before agreeing to Zhou Wen's request. Since he could no longer take the Nitin flying immortal palace into the family clan of gods, this secret was meaningless to them. Furthermore, even if Zhou Wen knew of this secret, he might not be able to obtain any benefits from it. Then let's not waste time. Let's begin. Just as Zhou Wen said that, he condensed the power of the ancient Sovereign Sutra and struck Moi's head. The calamity domain condensed by the ancient Sovereign Sutra was called the Human Emperor Sacrificial Domain. This power could restrain Lord Lusen's ability to reflect damage. Zhou Wen also wanted to know if the power of the ancient Sovereign Sutra could restrain Moi. When Moi saw Zhou Wen's palm strike, he had no intention of dodging. He felt that his Sword Dao realm was inferior to Zhou Wen's. Instead of wasting time competing with techniques, he might as well use his strongest strength to determine victory with Zhou Wen. Bam! Zhou Wen's palm struck Moi's head, producing a dull thud. End of this chapter. Chapter 1678. Mo's life providence was known as harming others without benefiting himself. Back then, he was famous for being a crippled life providence. When he hurt others, not only would they not be injured, but he would also suffer the same injuries. This life providence once made Mo doubt his life, but he didn't sink into it like the average person. Instead, he regained his confidence and firmly believed that there were no crippled life providences in the world. There were only crippled people. He would definitely find a way to use his life providence. However, after trying one method after another, they all ended in failure. Mo had also thought that perhaps his life soul had some special attribute that could reverse the disadvantages of his life providence or even turn them into advantages. However, the outcome wasn't the same. His life soul was still very weak, and he was similarly unable to harm others. When humans finally found a way to advance to the mythical stage, Mo placed his hopes on the Wheel of Destiny, thinking that perhaps it could change everything. However, the outcome was the same. His Wheel of Destiny was still of the same type. He still couldn't harm anyone. Even with Mo's strong mental endurance, he was on the verge of breaking down. Although he was a member of the God's family clan, he was just a cripple and could not obtain many resources. He had already paid the price to be able to reach the mythical level. No matter how many resources the family had, it was impossible for them to help him advance to the terror grade. Mo didn't blame his family. He felt that it was very fair. If it were him, he wouldn't invest resources on a hopeless person. Just as Mo, he had given up all hope. He had not expected that a death clan from another dimension would find him and help him advance to the calamity grade. Mo's life providence finally underwent a reversal when he advanced to the terror grade and entered the terror form. Just as he had imagined, he turned his disadvantage into an advantage. His terror form was called karma reversal. Under the effects of the terror form, harming others without benefiting himself became harming others for his own benefit. His life soul and Wheel of Destiny became extremely powerful as a result. Only when he advanced to the calamity grade could he finally control his strength freely and no longer be restrained. Not only could he injure others, but in his domain, if others harmed him, they would also have their karma reversed, causing the enemy to suffer injuries instead. Furthermore, this backlash would increase exponentially. Mo knew his abilities very well. Even if Zhou Wen's level was higher than his and his strength was stronger, it was still impossible for him to defeat him. The stronger Zhou Wen was, the more tragic his defeat would be. Bang! Zhou Wen slapped Mo on the head. Just as Mo was considering if he should take the opportunity to get rid of Zhou Wen, he suddenly felt a buzz in his head. His mind went blank as his body fell forward uncontrollably, slamming heavily into the ground. Following that, an intense pain spread throughout his body as the sound of bones cracking constantly sounded. Mo was slapped to the ground by Zhou Wen as his body twisted and sank into the ground. All the bones in his body cracked as blood seeped out of his 7 orifices. No, impossible. Mo's pupils contracted as he struggled to get up. However, he realized that the bones in his arms and legs had been broken into several pieces, and he couldn't control them at all. Not to mention standing up, he couldn't move at all. The intense pain invaded his nerves in waves. On the huge ship in the distance, the disciples of the Nitin flying immortal palace were dead silent. Everyone's mouths were agape as they stared blankly at Zhou Wen, who was standing there, and Mo, who had been slammed into the concrete ground. For an instant, they suspected that this was the real Mo. Perhaps this Mo was just a fake, a weak fake. Otherwise, how could he have been slapped to the ground by Zhou Wen to the point where he couldn't even get up? That was Mo, the Mo who had appeared in an invincible manner on the Rubik's Cube. Even calamity-grade dimensional creatures had been casually killed by him. He didn't even need to do a thing. If calamity creatures attacked him, they would be killed by the backlash. He was the spokesperson of the death race, Mo. If it wasn't for Mo killing hundreds of companion beast behemoths with one hand, and if it wasn't for Mo defeating, say, Gasikai with one strike, they could say without any doubt that he was definitely a trash imposter. But now, they looked at Zhou Wen with eyes filled with fanaticism and awe. This was the true pinnacle of human combat strength. Without becoming a spokesperson or relying on a guardian, he had reached an unbelievable level with his own strength. He had casually taught Han Shinsakura 3 moves, allowing Han Shinsakura to completely defeat Mo in sword techniques. With a casual palm, he had slapped Mo to the ground like a toad. What a terrifying existence he was. Master, is he really a pure human? Even Shiraishi Satomi, who knew Zhou Wen's identity as human emperor, found it difficult to believe the truth she knew. To be able to kill Mo with a single slap, Shiraishi Satomi found it hard to believe that a pure human could reach this stage. One had to know that before Zhou Wen was born, no human could advance to the mythical stage as a pure-blooded human, much less slap a calamity grade to the ground with a single palm. Some people are born different, say Gasikai said with a sigh. At that moment, Zhou Wen was like a god in the eyes of the Nitin flying immortal palace disciples. Zhou Wen looked at Mo, who was struggling on the ground but unable to stand up. He was somewhat surprised. He never expected the power of the ancient Sovereign Sutra to have a stronger restraining effect on Mo than he imagined. However, Zhou Wen quickly understood the reason. He had kept the sure domain, which had been raised to the hell grade. Now, the effects of the sure domain were even stronger than before. During the entire process of the ancient Sovereign Sutra's power resisting Mo's power, the effects of a sure domain were completely unleashed due to Mo's power being restrained. The laws of Mo's power had already been deduced by the sure domain. Zhou Wen already understood the laws of Mo's power and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Mo is quite unlucky. This power that reverses karma can give him an advantage over any powerful force. However, the domain power of the ancient Sovereign Sutra is a power of sacrifice. Human Emperor sacrifices the heavens, sacrificing oneself to help others. When used on him, it was originally a power of salvation, but it was forcefully turned into a form of harm by his power of reversing karma. It was only because Zhou Wen had the mindset of giving it a try in the beginning that he didn't dare use his full strength. He was afraid that the ancient sovereign sutra's power wouldn't be able to injure Mo and he would end up suffering instead. If he had used his full strength, he would probably have smacked Mo to death. Find someone and send him back. Zhou Wen wasn't a bloodthirsty person, nor did he have a reason to kill Mo. If it were anyone else, they might have believed that Mo was an enemy and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. However, Zhou Wen stood in a different position, so his horizons were different. Especially after a few conversations with his teacher, Wang Mingyuan, Zhou Wen clearly realized that his enemy wasn't humans, nor was it these spokespersons, but the terrifying dimension. These spokespersons might become the hope and main combat strength of humanity in the future. This was also why he didn't object to Feng Qiuyin and Ming Xiu becoming spokespersons. Chapter 1679. You won't kill me? Mo asked in surprise. He never expected that Zhou Wen would get someone to send him back instead of killing him. Others might be afraid of the family clan of God's faction and wouldn't dare attack him due to their qualms. But Mo knew very well that the family had no intention of compromising with the family clan of gods. Even if the family was willing to compromise, an existence like Zhou Wen didn't need to worry about the family clan of gods. Why should I kill you? Zhou Wen asked calmly. Because I'm your enemy now. Mo was startled at first and then said, My enemies have never been humans. With that said, Zhou Wen turned around and walked towards Han Shinsakura. Looking at Zhou Wen's back, Mo's expression kept changing. He kept thinking about Zhou Wen's words. My enemies have never been humans. He didn't know what to feel. Han Shinsakura found 2 disciples to send Mo away and led the remaining disciples back to guide Ancient City with Zhou Wen. The elders who were originally unwilling to move to guide Ancient City were now overjoyed. From time to time, they would appear in front of Zhou Wen and address him as Mr. Zhou in an affectionate manner. Zhou Wen was in a rather good mood. He originally thought that it would be a tiring trip, but he never expected to find a way to advance the Sure Domain. He was already planning to find Feng Qiuyin, Ming Xiu, and Qin Zhen to see if they could raise the Sure Domain to the Heaven Realm. When he came, he directly used his spatial transference ability, so it didn't take him much time. However, when he returned, he had to slowly travel with more than 10,000 Tian flying Immortal Palace disciples. It wasn't that fast. As the route they chose was relatively safe, they didn't encounter too much trouble along the way. There was no need for Zhou Wen to do anything about the small problems. Han Shinsakura and company resolved them themselves, so Zhou Wen had nothing to do. He wanted to play the game dungeon, but his phone was still charging, so he couldn't use it. The charging time was longer than Zhou Wen had expected. After more than 50 hours, the phone's battery finally reached 99%. It was just 1% away from being fully charged. Zhou Wen held his phone and waited for the final 1% to be completed. He was very curious about the difference after the phone was fully charged. Charging a normal phone was only for battery life, but the mysterious phone had no need for battery life at all. There should be some changes when charging. Ding! With a notification, the battery reached 100%. As Zhou Wen looked forward to it, the screen finally changed. The battery icon disappeared, and the screen turned black. A line of white words appeared in the middle of the screen. The battery is fully charged. System rebooting. Restart? Why aren't you leveling up? Zhou Wen was somewhat disappointed. He imagined that there would be a tremendous change, but he never expected it to be a reboot. The phone didn't make Zhou Wen wait too long. After a while, the line of text vanished. The phone screen lit up again and entered the familiar desktop. Looking at the familiar scene, Zhou Wen swiped a few times with his finger, but he didn't discover any obvious differences. Even the background was the same. Every game dungeon's icon was identical. Don't tell me this thing is really just for charging and increasing my battery life? Zhou Wen was depressed. After all this time, it didn't seem any different. After flipping through it several times, other than the icons of the downloaded game dungeons, nothing else had been added. No matter how he looked at it, it was exactly the same as before. Unwilling to give up, he studied it for a while longer, only to be completely disappointed. The mysterious phone didn't change at all. Are you messing with me? Zhou was depressed, but there was nothing he could do. He clicked open the Ant City dungeon. Having not grinded for a few days, he planned on grinding it to see if he could get anything useful. I wonder if the drop rate will be higher after charging it. It can't be useless, right? As Zhou thought to himself, he was suddenly stunned when he saw the Ant City dungeon. After clicking on the icon, he didn't directly enter the game screen like before. Instead, two options appeared. Normal mode, hidden mode. I knew it was impossible for there to be no changes at all. Could this be the legendary hidden dungeon? Zhou was overjoyed when he saw the two options. Without any hesitation, he chose the hidden mode. In previous games, there were always some hidden places. Even if he cleared the game, it was very likely that he wouldn't discover those hidden mysterious dungeons. Typically, he had to use special methods to enter. Hidden dungeons often had all sorts of hidden bosses and treasures. It was also possible that the drop rate was much higher than ordinary dungeons. Zhou only imagined the scene of a few dimensional creatures dropping companion eggs and primordial energy crystals after entering a hidden dungeon. He couldn't wait any longer. If he was lucky, he might be able to drop a divine artifact just by killing a monster. Just the thought of it excited him. Ant City was a dungeon that came with the phone. It was also the first dungeon Zhou had come into contact with. However, Zhou had yet to kill the Guardian in Ant City. This Guardian could actually become stronger and stronger over time. This was a unique existence. After entering Ant City, the game screen didn't seem to change. The ant-type dimensional creatures didn't show any signs of becoming stronger. With Zhou's present strength, he could kill a large swath of them with a single strike. Soon, he arrived at the ant nest. Just as Zhou was about to rush into the huge hive where the Golden Ant King was, he suddenly saw a strange glow appear on the game screen. Although it was called Ant City, it was actually a huge cave with many ant nests inside. In the past, Zhou would clear the ant nests before fighting the Ant City Guardian. The layout of the cave and the ant nest didn't change, but in the innermost part of the cave, there was a mountain wall that shimmered with golden light. Zhou looked carefully and realized that there was a protruding rock on the mountain wall that shimmered with golden light. The rock was only the size of a palm and slightly protruded in an arc. Its color and texture were no different from ordinary rocks. If it wasn't for the rock shimmering with golden light, Zhou probably wouldn't have noticed it no matter how many times he came. Zhou stopped provoking the ant horde in Ant City and summoned the invisibility cloak to wear. He secretly came in front of the shimmering rock and reached out to touch it. The rock itself didn't seem to be anything special. It was no different from the rocks beside it, so it was unlikely to be a treasure. Zhou attempted to probe it. We tried to rotate the rock with his hand. The rock actually moved. Then, he heard a cracking sound as the rock retracted into the mountain wall. Then, the mountain wall cracked open, revealing a crack that could allow a person to pass through. 2 days ago, I played with my cat. It was too crazy and I threw it out. It was afraid and reached out its claws to grab my hand. In the end, it flew away and left 3 bloody claw marks on my hand. I went to get a rabies vaccine and was asked to get a serum injection. It's a little inconvenient for me to type. I made everyone worried. End of this chapter. Chapter 1680. The rift was filled with golden light, making it impossible to see what was inside. Zhou had no choice but to give up on observing it and control the blood-colored avatar to enter the rift. It looked resplendent on the outside, but the golden light was like a thin layer of ripples. After passing through the golden light, there was another cave inside. The cave was rather large, and the space was about the same as a factory's warehouse. Inside the huge cave, there was no sign of dimensional creatures. There was only a huge egg-shaped object carved from gold on a stone platform. That thing was golden and looked very much like 24K gold. It was more than a meter tall and nearly a meter wide. It looked fat, and there were many strange patterns on it. They were curved, and no one knew what they were. Perhaps they weren't patterns at all, but natural patterns. Is this a companion egg? Zhou reached out to caress the golden egg as a message immediately appeared on his phone. Golden demonic ant king. Mortal, evolvable, strength, 11 speed, 11 constitution, 11 primordial energy, 11 talent skill. Golden guardian, demonification, ant strength god, king form companion form, golden battle armor, an evolvable companion beast. Zhou expression turned odd. This was equivalent to picking it up for free. Furthermore, from its skills, it was both king and demon god. It seemed rather powerful. If every dimensional zone had such a hidden spot, wouldn't he be able to pick up godly items everywhere? With this in mind, Zhou couldn't close his mouth. He hatched the golden demonic ant king without looking at what it looked like. He eagerly exited the Ant City dungeon and chose the Big Dipper dungeon. Ant City could only be considered a low-level game dungeon. Apart from the Ant City Guardian, the other dimensional creatures' levels were pitifully low. If such a dungeon had evolvable companion beasts, what treasures would be hidden in a high-level dungeon like the Big Dipper? Just the thought made Zhou excited and looked forward to it. Of course, there were some higher-level dungeons, such as Chess Mountain. Although there might be better items hidden there, Zhou couldn't clear those places. He couldn't enter any random place. If the hidden dungeon was somewhere Zhou couldn't reach, it would be useless even if he entered. Zhou could already clear the 7-star palaces of the Big Dipper dungeon. No matter where the hidden dungeon was, he could find it. He planned on using it as an experiment. He eagerly clicked open the Big Dipper dungeon. Just like before, there were 2 choices, normal and hidden mode. Zhou didn't hesitate to choose hidden mode. After entering the 1-star palace, he didn't find any traces of the hidden dungeon. All he could do was storm through the star palaces one by one, but he was disappointed again and again. After killing 6 star lords in the star palaces, he didn't find any traces of the hidden dungeon. From the looks of it, it must be in the last star palace. At that moment, Zhou wasn't in a hurry. He teleported into the last Alcade Star Palace. The Alcade Star Palace was the star palace where Star Lord Vanquisher resided. It was the last of the 7 Big Dipper star palaces. In front of the star palace, there was a long staircase. Walking on it would cause one to lose all their essence energy. Only Shiryu's power could restrain the taboo power. Without Shiryu's ability, they would lose all their essence chi when they reached the star palace. No matter how strong they would be killed by Star Lord defeating army. However, to Zhou, Star Lord defeating army was the easiest Star Lord to kill. In front of the staircase, he didn't find any traces of the hidden dungeon. Zhou activated Shiryu and walked into the Star Palace. With one strike, he killed Star Lord defeating army. Unfortunately, only some essence energy crystals dropped. He didn't find any companion eggs or skill crystals. Zhou didn't care about this at all today. He didn't even look at the essence energy crystals on the ground because he realized that there was an icy blue light shimmering in the Alcade Star Palace. The Alcade Star Palace was a miniature starry sky. On the top of the arc-shaped star palace, there were many stars twinkling. It should have been a sky filled with stars, but now there was a star that shone with a dazzling, icy blue light. It covered the light of the other stars, making them dim. Only that star shone with an icy blue glow. Without a doubt, the miniature star that shone with an icy blue glow in the corner was likely the key to the hidden dungeon. Zhou flew over and soon arrived in front of the miniature star. Although he knew how to activate the hidden dungeon, it was only a matter of time before he figured out the method, since he had found the crux of the matter. Zhou studied it for a while. When he pushed the miniature star to spin, it immediately erupted with a dazzling, icy blue beam. Zhou was given a fright as he teleported into the distance. However, he realized that the icy blue beam wasn't aimed at him. Instead, it happened to shoot at the teleportation array in the Alcade Star Palace. The teleportation array was immediately dyed icy blue. The star lines shimmered with an icy blue glow, completely different from how they usually looked when activated. This was the last star palace. Usually, he would directly teleport out of the Big Dipper Star Palace through this teleportation array. Now, it looked like a completely different world. Zhou walked into the teleportation array, and the teleportation array that emitted a blue light immediately activated, teleporting him out of the Alcade Star Palace. After a moment of dizziness, the scene in front of Zhou became clear. After seeing the scene in front of him clearly, Zhou couldn't help but be slightly taken aback. In front of him was another star palace. It was a star palace built from ice. The star palace was supported by huge ice pillars. There was a door, but there was no door panel. At a glance, he could see that in the middle of the huge ice palace stood a Star Lord dressed in ice armor. The Star Lord stood on the ice platform, her posture tall and straight. Her head was slightly raised, and her eyes, under the profound ice armor, seemed to be looking up at the sky. Her hands were folded on the hilt of a profound ice sword, and the tip of the profound ice sword was inserted into the ice platform. From her curvaceous figure that even the armor couldn't hide, she was undoubtedly a female celebrity. However, her aura was like that of a sovereign descending upon the world. It made one have the urge to bow down and kowtow. Star Lord Polaris. When Zhou saw the female celebrity's name in-game, he was immediately alarmed as his expression changed. This name wasn't unfamiliar to Zhou at all. Back then, the antelope had tricked him into carrying a huge log to Forbidden City. However, when he arrived at Forbidden City, he realized that the log was a living coffin. The person sleeping inside was Star-Lord Polaris, and he had nearly lost Zhou-Wen's life. However, Star-Lord Polaris was a guardian. Zhou-Wen believed that it was just a coincidence that their names were the same. There shouldn't be any relationship between the two. However, in the next second, Zhou-Wen realized that his thoughts were wrong. Chapter 1681. When Purple Star-Lord slowly lowered his head to look at Zhou-Wen, starlight appeared in the ice palace like a sky full of stars. It was the heavenly cycle stellar array that Zhou-Wen was very familiar with. Back then, Zhou-Wen had imitated Purple Star-Lord's heavenly cycle stellar array and created a minor heavenly cycle array. With just a glance, Zhou-Wen's hair stood on end. He summoned the Hellstage Chaos Egg to protect his body. It was because he was too familiar with the heavenly cycle stellar array that Zhou-Wen knew how terrifying the starlight was. The one in Forbidden City was already very terrifying. This heavenly cycle stellar array didn't seem much different, but the power within left Zhou-Wen's heart palpitating. Just as the Chaos Egg was summoned, he saw the sky fill with starlight. Endless starlight shone on the Chaos Egg, instantly devouring the entire star palace. The number of essence energy crystals in the Chaos Egg rapidly increased. The Hellstage Chaos Egg could fuse 100 million essence energy crystals into one. But even so, it was difficult for it to contain the rapidly produced essence energy. In just a few seconds, the Hellstage Chaos Egg exploded. The blood-colored avatar that was exposed to the starlight was instantly killed by the starlight. What the hell is this thing? It's definitely a heaven realm existence. Isn't a hidden dungeon just treasure picking? Why is there such a thing? Zhou-Wen looked at the game screen that had turned black, his mind filled with question marks. His original plan of treasure picking didn't seem to work now. Zhou-Wen thought for a moment and had a new guess about the hidden dungeon. Now, Zhou-Wen suspected that the reason why Ant City's hidden dungeon didn't have dimensional creatures and only had one companion egg was very likely because it was a dungeon that came with the phone. It was equivalent to a newbie dungeon. As for the golden demonic Ant King companion egg, it was like a newbie benefit. Under normal circumstances, Zhou-Wen would have obtained the golden demonic Ant King companion beast from the beginning if he had the power bank. Unfortunately, he had only obtained the phone in the beginning and didn't have the power bank. Therefore, he had missed the newbie benefit. Now, Zhou-Wen seriously suspected that apart from Ant City's hidden dungeon, the other hidden dungeons wouldn't be so easy to obtain benefits. It wasn't difficult to confirm this guess. Zhou-Wen started a new dungeon. This time, he opened the low-level Dragon Gate Grotto. The truth was as Zhou-Wen had guessed. When he found the hidden dungeon in Dragon Gate Grotto, he realized that the hidden dungeon was the dragon's well that Wang Mingyuan had used to mutate. In that case, these hidden dungeons also exist in reality. It's just that some hidden dungeons haven't been discovered. A thought flashed through Zhou mind. However, after thinking about it, even if he knew the location of the hidden dungeon in real life, it did not seem to be of much use. In any case, he could grind the hidden dungeon in-game. That's not right. Zhou quickly realized that something was amiss. This was because he had previously thought of entering Ant City's hidden dungeon again to see if he could obtain a golden demonic Ant King companion egg, but there was nothing inside. In other words, it was very likely that the items inside the hidden instance dungeon would not refresh. Or perhaps the refresh rate was very slow. In that case, knowing the location of the hidden instance dungeon in the real world became very important. After clearing a hidden dungeon in the game, he could return to the real world to clear it again. This was equivalent to obtaining the reward of clearing 2 hidden dungeons. Just like the White Dragon in Dragon's Well, the White Dragon in real life had been fused by Wang Mingyuan, but there was still a White Dragon in-game. Now, all Zhou needed to do was kill the White Dragon and see if it would respawn again. Then, he would know if his guess was wrong. The White Dragon had an ice attribute and was at the Terror grade. To the Zhou back in school, it was an almost invincible existence, but now he could directly look down on it, seeing the White Dragon spew out an ice fog that resembled a cold wave. Zhou threw a punch at it. Powerful essence energy swept the ice fog away. Zhou originally thought that the Terror grade White Dragon would only be killed if his punch landed on it. However, the outcome surprised Zhou. After he killed the White Dragon with one punch, its body shattered like ice from a heavy blow. It looked like it was dead. Zhou couldn't see the White Dragon's existence with his eyes, but within Truth Listener's ability, a White Dragon's figure appeared in Zhou's mind. It was still in its original spot. Zhou looked carefully again and used some skills that enhanced his eyesight. He even used Dr. Darkness's Eyes of Penetration, but he still couldn't see the White Dragon's existence. After dispelling Truth Listener's ability, Zhou couldn't hear anything when he used his ears to listen. It was as though there was nothing there. The other companion beasts that enhanced their hearing also found it difficult to discover the White Dragon's figure. Only Truth Listener's ability could discover its existence. It was as though the White Dragon's figure was a ghost. Ordinary people couldn't see a ghost at all. Only people with yin-yang eyes could see it. What the hell is this? Could it be that dimensional creatures have ghosts? The more Zhou looked at the White Dragon's shattered body, the stranger he found it. Just as Zhou was thinking, the ghost-like White Dragon moved and charged at him. When it moved, it was silent and didn't cause any spatial fluctuations. It was really like a ghost. Chapter 1682. What's that? Zhou was alarmed. Although his true level was at the Terror grade, it was very rare for a Terror grade creature to kill him. What was even stranger was that apart from Truth Listener, no one could see that thing. This was the most terrifying thing. If an enemy had such an ability, wouldn't they be able to kill whoever they wanted? Ignoring the fact that it was difficult to guard against it while sleeping, even if one didn't sleep and just stared at it, they would still be silently killed. They wouldn't even know how they died. Even Shiryu, who could analyze all sorts of laws, couldn't sense the existence of that thing. This was a little terrifying. After entering Dragon Gate Grotto again, Zhou wanted to figure out what it was. After entering the dungeon again, the White Dragon returned to its original appearance. From the looks of it, it hadn't really died and turned into a ghost. The ghost-like thing was likely one of its abilities. After killing the White Dragon again, the ghost-like White Dragon appeared again. Just like last time, it silently charged at Zhou. This time, Zhou chose to dodge. The ghost White Dragon's speed naturally couldn't match Zhou. It chased after him, but it couldn't keep up with his speed. As Zhou dodged, he observed the White Dragon and realized that in this strange state, it didn't seem to use any other skills. All it did was try to burrow into Zhou's body. He summoned Tyrant Behemoth and got it to face the ghost White Dragon. However, Tyrant Behemoth couldn't see the ghost White Dragon at all. Even under Zhou's orders, Tyrant Behemoth used all its strength to strike the ghost White Dragon, but it was as though it had struck air. As for the ghost white dragon, it seemed to pass through a wall as it passed through Tyrant Behemoth's body. Tyrant Behemoth immediately died and collapsed to the ground. This time, Joan saw it clearly. The moment the ghost white dragon passed through Tyrant Behemoth's body, it transformed into a humanoid ghost creature. This thing looks very similar to Teacher Zhou when looked at the ghost creature's appearance. It was surprisingly similar to Wang Mingyuan's mutated appearance, but it was even more inhuman than Wang Mingyuan. Instead, it looked like the legendary Dragon Man with a dragon head and a human body. It was extremely strange. The time the ghost creature maintained its Dragon Man appearance was very short. Not long after passing through Tyrant Behemoth's body, it transformed into a ghost white dragon. Zhou made some more attempts and realized that all sorts of companion beasts would die on the spot once the ghost white dragon passed through them. They wouldn't be injured at all, as though their souls had been taken away. Every time the ghost white dragon took the life of a companion beast, it would appear in its Dragon Man form for a moment. He made some more attempts and realized that when it was in the specter white dragon form, apart from Truth Listener, no powers could injure it. However, when it was in the Dragon Man form, some powers could injure it. For example, the power of the Tao Sutra and the small perfection of Wisdom Sutra could cause harm to him when he was in his Dragon Man form. What a strange ability. After doing all sorts of tests, Zhou had a comprehensive understanding of ghost creatures. Immediately, he used the power of the Tao Sutra and shattered the ghost creature with a punch. Hunted Terror Creature, Exquisite 9 Aperture Dragon. Discovered Essence, Energy Crystal, Hunting Terrorgrade Guardian who crosses the boundary. Zhou stared at the notification on his phone in a daze. He wasn't even in the mood to look at the items that had fallen to the ground. What's going on? Could it be that the Guardian is parasitizing the Exquisite 9 Aperture Dragon's body? Many thoughts flashed through Zhou's mind. He was certain that Wang Mingyuan had fused with the Realm Crosser back then. He looked down at the items that had fallen to the ground and realized that apart from the Essence Energy Crystal, there was something Zhou had never seen before. It was something that looked like an ice crystal. Its shape was extremely irregular. It looked like a heart, but it also looked like a skull, but it didn't look like either. On the ice crystal-like object, there were 9 holes of different sizes. The name displayed in-game was Exquisite 9 Aperture. Zhou picked it up and carefully read its information. Exquisite 9 Aperture can enlighten companion beasts. Zhou knew these words, but he didn't know what they meant when they were connected together. Does enlightening mean opening up a certain acupuncture point in the body, or is it similar to an epiphany? Zhou only knew that humans had the concept of enlightening their orifices. But that was when a certain person was too slow to learn anything, and one day he suddenly seemed to understand everything and understood everything with a little bit of guidance. However, Zhou couldn't guess what effects this term had when used on companion beasts. If it was only making companion beasts smarter, it didn't seem to be of much use to Zhou. This was because to him, most companion beasts were just tools. He could control them to fight without needing them to be too smart. Furthermore, Zhou's main companion beasts were basically similar to those with high intelligence. It didn't seem like there was a need for them to become smarter. After searching the hidden dungeon, he didn't find anything else. He was almost certain that the Exquisite 9 Aperture was the hidden dungeon's reward. Items in-game had to be used in-game and couldn't be taken out of the game. If they were left in-game, he was afraid that they would be gone after the dungeon refreshed. All Zhou could do was decide which companion beast to use the Exquisite 9 Aperture. Let Little Infant take a look. Zhou wanted to summon Demonic Neonate, but he failed to do so. Only then did he recall that Demonic Neonate was still evolving and couldn't be summoned. In fact, if it was something that awakened intelligence, Zhou had another choice, to give it to the fiend-armored Tiger Soul General. That fellow was like a machine that only knew how to kill. It didn't seem to have high intelligence, so if it could become smarter, it would definitely be even more terrifying. Unfortunately, the fiend-armored Tiger Soul General stats and skills were ultimately a thorn in Zhou's heart, so it was best not to let it use it. Demonic neonate is evolving. Forget about the fiend-armored tiger soul general. Then, who should I give it to? Zhou thought about his companion beasts and finally summoned Truth Listener. Truth Listener's intelligence wasn't low, but it didn't know how to speak, so it gave off the feeling that it wasn't very intelligent. Zhou wasn't sure what use the exquisite 9 aperture was. Furthermore, he didn't have a companion beast that he particularly wanted to improve. Giving it to Truth Listener was a good choice. Upon receiving Zhou Wen's order, Truth Listener swallowed the exquisite 9 aperture in one mouthful. Then, its body suddenly emitted golden light as the earrings on its 6 ears began to shatter. Is the effect that powerful? Zhou Wen was given a fright. It had been a long time since he had gotten Truth Listener to shatter the earrings. Now that the 6 earrings had shattered, it would be terrible if something happened. The only thing he was thankful for was that he was in-game. Even if something really happened, it wouldn't affect Truth Listener in reality. If the 6 earrings were to shatter in reality, Truth Listener might even have the risk of escaping Zhou Wen's control. This had happened before. Zhou Wen stared intently at the phone screen and watched as Truth Listener's body transformed into a terrifying golden ape after the earrings shattered. Golden light shot out from its body as a violent aura nearly burst out of the screen. End of this chapter. Chapter 1683. As the golden light intensified, the golden ape's body became smaller and smaller as its body gradually transformed into a human's form. Zhou Wen had seen Truth Listener's form once before. He felt that it was somewhat similar to the Super Saiyan transformation of a certain protagonist in a comic. However, in that state, Truth Listener was almost about to escape Zhou Wen's control and leave his companion beast team. Now, Truth Listener had once again transformed into a wild, blonde warrior. It was unknown if it was because he was in-game, but this time, Zhou Wen didn't feel like he had lost contact with Truth Listener. Even with all 6 earrings destroyed and him in human form, the connection between him and Truth Listener was still very clear. It wasn't as faint as when he summoned Truth Listener in reality. On Truth Listener's head, 9 strange beams of light spewed out. They looked like 9 holes, but in fact, it was just an illusion because the light source was too intense. The 9 spots of light corresponded to the 9 holes of the 9 orifices' exquisite body. Roar! The 9 spots of light on its head lit up at the same time, like the final eruption of a volcano. The light was so bright that one couldn't open their eyes. All they could hear was Truth Listener's painful roar. After the light gradually weakened, Zhou Wen could see the scene in-game again. Truth Listener, who had transformed into a beautiful, blonde man, stood there. It was half a head taller than Zhou Wen. It looked somewhat sinister, but its eyes were surprisingly gentle, as though it was looking at the blood-colored avatar. This feeling was very magical. In the past, when Zhou Wen used Truth Listener, he would always feel apprehensive. He was either afraid that it would hit him or that it would sever ties with him. This was the first time he had seen Truth Listener standing silently in front of him with all its abilities activated after the earrings shattered. Zhou Wen opened Truth Listener's information panel and checked its current stats and level. Truth Listener, Calamity Grade, Evolvable, Life Providence, Omnipotent Ears Life Soul, Evil Nullification Wheel of Destiny, Nirvana of Ultimate Hell Terror Form, Holy Evil, S Grade, Calamity Domain, Evil Annihilation, Heavenly Realm, Strength, 999 Speed, 999 Constitution, 999 Essence Energy, 999 Talent Skill. Truth Listener, Indestructible Golden Body, Evil Warding, 9 Extremes Companion Form. Earring Wow, a Heaven Realm stats can actually reach 999. Zhou Wen's face was filled with envy and surprise. He had yet to advance to the Calamity Grade, so the upper limit of his attributes was 99. At the Mortal Grade, he would be able to break through to 100 points, reaching a maximum of 199 points. The lowest stat at Hell Stage was 200. As for the highest, Zhou Wen wasn't sure. He guessed that it was 400 or 999, but the stat of 999 at the heaven stage was truly terrifying. If the North Star's Purple Star-Lord also had such attributes, it would not be strange for him to be able to blast through the hell-level Chaos Egg. Of course, Joan felt that such stats weren't something every companion beast could achieve. After all, many companion beasts had limited talent. They might not be able to advance to the Heaven Realm, and even if they advanced to the Heaven Realm, their stats might not be full. From Joan's point of view, a stat value of 999 was likely the maximum stat at the Heaven Realm stage. He guessed that demonic neonate would have such stats when she advanced to the Heaven Realm stage. It was hard to say for the other companion beasts. Companion beasts that could also evolve had differences in quality. Joan really wanted to summon Truth Listener in reality, but when he thought about how he was surrounded by disciples of the Nitin Flying Immortal Palace, he decided against it. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Joan left the Ant City dungeon and activated the Big Dipper dungeon. He wanted to see if Truth Listener at the Heaven Realm could defeat Purple Star-Lord. How strong is Truth Listener at the Heaven Realm? Joan couldn't wait to see Truth Listener's abilities. When facing Star-Lord Covetous Wolf, Joan summoned Truth Listener and released his strongest human form. Greed threw a punch as a terrifying explosion of light illuminated the entire Star Palace. Boom! With a casual punch from Truth Listener, Star-Lord Greed and half of the Star Palace were blasted apart. Looking at the ruined Star-Lord Greed, Joan's mouth gaped open for a long time. This is 2F** King Violet. Joan muttered inwardly as his face beamed with joy. Star-Lord Colossal Gate was instantly killed without any suspense. Joan originally imagined that Star-Lord Lu Siyuan, who had the ability to reflect damage, might bring some trouble to a purely strength-type companion beast like Truth Listener, or it was very likely that Joan would need to take action personally. In the beginning, Joan was still thinking that although Truth Listener was strong, it still needed to rely on him, its owner, to clear the Big Dipper dungeon. However, the outcome left Joan dumbfounded. Truth Listener's punch directly blasted Star-Lord Lu Siyuan. What damage? Why not a fight head-on? It was all F***King bullshit. In front of the violent Truth Listener, there was nothing that couldn't be resolved with a punch. If there was, he would give it another punch. Civil Star-Lord, Star-Lord Lien Jun, and Star-Lord Military Star-Lord were instantly killed. The staircase in front of the Army Destroyer Star Palace that could make one lose their essence, energy, couldn't stop Truth Listener. There was no need for Joan's Teacher Domain's powers to restrain the Taboo power. Truth Listener casually walked up to the Army Destroyer Star Palace before punching Army Destroyer into smithereens. Joan finally understood what it meant to be able to defeat all with brute force. Truth Listener didn't have many strange abilities, but its strength was practically invincible. Of course, Joan wasn't naive enough to believe that Truth Listener was that powerful just because of its pure strength. The reason why Truth Listener's pure strength was so strong was because of the premise, the evil nullification, evil holy, evil vanquishing, and evil warding powers. It was because of the existence of these powers that he could fight without any qualms and not be restrained by some strange powers. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to pass Star-Lord Lu Siyuan's test with his strength. Following behind Truth Listener, Joan's only use was to use the teleportation array to enter the next Star Palace. After killing Army Destroyer, he activated the hidden teleportation array that led to the Polaris Palace. Such a powerful Truth Listener shouldn't be weaker than Star-Lord Polaris, right? When he arrived in front of the Ice Palace again, Joan still felt a little uneasy when he saw Star-Lord Polaris standing with her sword pressed against her chest. Truth Listener was indeed very strong, but Star-Lord Polaris wasn't weak either. An existence that could blast apart a Hellstage Chaos Egg was definitely not to be underestimated. Upon sensing Joan and Truth Listener's arrival, Star-Lord Polaris slowly lowered her head to look at them. At the same time, resplendent starlight began to rise from her body. The entire star palace seemed to transform into an endless sea of starlight as starlight illuminated Zhou, Wen, and company, making them feel as though they were in a sea of starlight. Truth Listener stood in front of Zhou, Wen, as the golden light on its body flickered like electric currents. Its wild golden eyes seemed to pierce through thousands of starlight as they collided with Star Lord Polaris's gaze. Chapter 1684. Zhou summoned the Chaos Egg to protect his body. In such a battle, all he needed to do was protect his life and not let himself become a burden to Truth Listener. Thousands of starlight interweaved as though the sea was collapsing. It was unimaginably terrifying, as though it was the end of the world. Truth Listener's body emitted golden light as it raised its head to face the endless and omnipresent starlight. It didn't have any intention of dodging or defending. Its legs suddenly exerted strength as its body shot towards the starlight like a cannonball. Damn it! Zhou let out a tragic cry. Although Truth Listener was a pure, strength-type companion beast and didn't have the ability to release its strength, just the fluctuations produced when its strength tore through space sent Zhou flying. The essence energy in the Chaos Egg frantically crystallized. Before it could resist the starlight, half of the essence energy in the Chaos Egg had accumulated. The Chaos Egg tumbled incessantly, making Zhou grumble inwardly. He swore to stay far away from Truth Listener in future battles. Boom! Just as these mixed thoughts were still in Zhou Wen's mind, he heard a terrifying explosion. Truth Listener collided head-on with the great heavenly cycle stellar array starlight. Countless starlight interweaved with his body like laser blades. The light was abnormally sharp, as though it could slice through everything. However, when it struck Truth Listener's resplendent golden body, it shattered like glass. Truth Listener instantly tore through the layers of starlight and threw a punch at Purple Star Lord, who was standing in the middle of the hall. Purple Star Lord finally moved. He pulled out the Mystic Ice Sword that was stabbed into the ground with one hand. The Mystic Ice Sword that was originally like black ice was instantly filled with starlight. The blade slashed down and collided with Truth Listener's fist. Boom! Golden and blue light erupted, producing a shockwave that shattered the Chaos Egg's interior. It was on the verge of exploding. Zhou was no longer in the mood to pay attention to the battle between Truth Listener and Purple Star Lord. His priority was to survive. Otherwise, once he died, the game would be over. It would be useless no matter how strong Truth Listener was. It was clearly impossible for him to continue surviving by relying on the Chaos Egg strength. Zhou mind raced as he thought of how he could survive a little longer. Although the teacher domain could play a certain role, defense wasn't its forte, so it wasn't of much use. Apart from the sure domain and the Chaos Egg, Zhou still had two domain-level powers. One was the human sovereign sacrificial domain. This was clearly not suitable for the present situation. The other was the boundless sword realm. However, under normal circumstances, the boundless sword realm was used for attacking. Moreover, the boundless sword realm was only at the mortal realm level. It was very difficult to compete with the power of the great heavenly star formation at the heaven realm level. However, with Shiryu's help, Zhou acutely discovered an opportunity. Originally, no matter how the man-level boundless sword domain changed, it was impossible for it to compete with the great heavenly cycle stellar array. However, because Truth Listener had attracted most of the starlight, it gave the boundless sword domain chance. This sliver of possibility was because Zhou understood the major heavenly cycle stellar array very well. He had even used it as a blueprint to create the minor heavenly cycle stellar array. This allowed him to think of a solution that wasn't really a solution. Whether I live or die, I can only fight. Zhou gritted his teeth and crazily circulated the Qi refinement art. Countless sword pill particles erupted and surrounded the Chaos Egg. The sword pill particles were also arranged in the form of a heavenly cycle. It was the minor heavenly cycle stellar array that Zhou Wen had created. If it was used to deal with ordinary natural disasters, the minor heavenly cycle stellar array, formed by the sword pill particles, could be said to be indestructible. However, it was easily destroyed in Purple Star-Lord's great heavenly cycle stellar array. However, the sword pill particles weren't really destroyed. They were a force that had both ethereal and corporeal characteristics. They looked like they had been destroyed, but in fact, they had only transformed into virtual particles. In theory, sword pill particles were truly indestructible existences. Of course, the sword pill particles that had transformed into virtual particles were temporarily useless. Zhou Wen had to last until the sword pill particles turned into corporeal particles again. If it were any other time, it would be impossible for Zhou Wen to condense too many sword pill particles at once. However, the Chaos Egg was filled with essence energy crystals. Furthermore, each essence energy crystal was stacked with hundreds of millions of essence energy crystals. The amount of essence energy was astonishing. Zhou Wen directly attempted to use himself as a medium, or rather, a transit station. He used the Qi refinement art to crazily absorb the essence energy crystals before transforming them into sword pill particles to form the minor heavenly cycle stellar array to resist the terrifying forces of the outside world. After all, Zhou Wen's body was only at the Terra grade. If massive amounts of essence energy were to be sucked into his body, he probably wouldn't be able to withstand it. However, Zhou Wen had no choice but to place his hopes on the Qi refinement art. The Qi refinement art was a super rich essence energy art. Ever since he cultivated it, Zhou Wen had devoured countless essence energy crystals to cultivate to such a level. In the past, Zhou Wen would feel the pinch, but now he only hoped that the Qi refinement art's appetite was huge enough to completely convert the essence energy crystals he absorbed into sword pill particles. A stacked essence energy crystal with hundreds of millions of essence energy crystals was already enough to explode Zhou Wen's fragile terror body. Now he had absorbed thousands of essence energy crystals into his body. All Zhou Wen could do was silently pray for Tiantian's blessings. Zhou Wen didn't wish to absorb that much, but if he didn't, the constantly accumulating essence energy crystals would cause the Chaos Egg to explode. Terrifying essence energy surged in Zhou Wen's body, making him feel like his body was about to be crushed and explode. He couldn't help but howl. Zhou Wen believed that his body was about to explode, but he didn't. Amidst the pain that felt like his body was being completely crushed to pieces, Zhou Wen managed to withstand it. This wasn't to say that Zhou Wen's body was very strong, but because the Qi refinement art had forcefully guided the violent essence energy to flow crazily in Zhou Wen's body, transforming it into a large number of sword pill particles. Zhou Wen's body seemed to be repeatedly jumping from the gates of hell. Every time Zhou Wen thought that his body was about to explode, the Qi refinement art would transform a large number of sword pill particles out, allowing Zhou Wen, who had 1 foot in the gates of hell, to jump out again. Although the Qi refinement art was very impressive, there were just too many essence energy crystals. The speed at which they were transformed couldn't keep up with Zhou Wen's essence energy absorption. Just as Zhou Wen thought he was doomed, the boundless sword domain suddenly underwent a strange change. Although this change was strange, it wasn't a coincidence. Apart from transforming a large number of sword pill particles, forming the largest boundless sword domain in history, Zhou Wen was also constantly using the Master Domain to observe Purple Star-Lord's major heavenly cycle stellar array. At the same time, he adjusted the minor heavenly cycle stellar array that the sword pill particles arranged. The Hell Stage Master Domain was much more powerful than before. The things that could be analyzed were naturally far more than before. Chapter 1685. A large number of sword pill particles followed Zhou Wen's will and arranged themselves in the form of the minor heavenly cycle sword array. As Zhou Wen continued inferring, the sword pill particles arrangement became more and more orderly. Just as Zhou Wen's body was about to collapse, a large number of sword pill particles suddenly seemed to possess life and consciousness as they automatically began to circulate. All the particles in the sword pellet seemed to be attracted by a magnet and gathered together. However, this gathering wasn't random. Instead, it was based on a minor heavenly cycle sword arrays arrangement, but it didn't completely follow the rules. It was as though it instinctively followed some strange rules. In an instant, all the sword pill particles were tightly connected, leaving no gaps in the middle as though they had become a natural entity. The sword pill particles were extremely small to begin with. Even if they were arranged together under Zhou Wen's control, it was inevitable that there would be gaps in the middle. However, there were no gaps between the sword pill particles. It was as though they were originally one, a complete, large-scale sword pill particle. However, the sword pill particles weren't in the shape of a sword or a ball. Instead, they were arranged in the shape of an egg that enveloped the chaos egg, constantly resisting the external attacks. Zhou Wen was surprised to discover that the sword domain had advanced to the hell stage. Furthermore, it was crazily extracting essence energy from his body. The egg-shaped sword pill that enveloped Zhou Wen became larger and larger. The sword domain that had advanced to the hell stage originally couldn't compete with Purple Star Lord's strength. However, due to the Qi refinement art's characteristic of absorbing essence energy and the infinite essence energy in the chaos egg, the sword domain became stronger. As long as there was essence energy, the sword domain seemed to be infinitely stronger. What was lacking in quality could be made up for with quantity. Furthermore, the sword pill particles had the undying characteristic. They would only become stronger. Bullets could penetrate steel plates, but they couldn't penetrate a 1,000-meter-tall mound. Now, the sword pill particles in the sword domain were too dense, and their numbers were increasing. They gradually stabilized the situation while resisting Purple Star Lord's strength. The combination of the Hell Stage Chaos Egg and the Hell Stage Sword Domain produced an unexpected effect, allowing Zhou Wen to gain a foothold in such a terrifying battlefield. As the Sword Domain upgraded, Zhou Wen also sensed the changes in the Sword Domain's effects. It didn't mean that the Sword Domain would really be in the shape of an egg in the future. The egg shape was only because Zhou Wen needed it to be arranged in such a form. If Zhou Wen needed it, he could completely transform it into a sword or other shapes. The true improvement of the sword domain was the effect of the sword pill particles turning into a whole. A chopstick could be easily broken, but a bundle of chopsticks was very difficult to break. Furthermore, the particles of the sword pellet that had turned into a whole were not as simple as a bundle of chopsticks. They had truly condensed into one. Only now did Zhou Wen have the mood to size up the situation on the battlefield. However, all he could see was a sky full of starlight and a constantly flickering golden light. It was so fast that even with Zhou Wen's eyesight, he couldn't see their movements clearly. He couldn't even see their figures clearly. Wherever Truth Listener moved, it left behind golden afterimages. In of Zhou Wen, the of. The star of the of one of world was a wind's eyes of the divine Wen Yi. Zhou Wen couldn't see it, but sure you could sense the changes in the laws of power. In Shiryu's domain, Zhou Wen sensed an extremely domineering force and a brilliant imperial aura constantly colliding. Zhou Wen couldn't see it, but he could sense the changes in the laws of power in the Shur domain. In the Shur domain, Zhou Wen sensed an extremely domineering force constantly colliding with a brilliant imperial aura. Even though Zhou Wen couldn't see it clearly, Shiryu still constantly replicated the laws of the brilliant imperial aura, allowing the power to become more and more orderly in Zhou Wen's eyes. Even though Zhou Wen couldn't see it clearly, Shiryu still constantly replicated the laws of the brilliant imperial aura, allowing the power to become more and more orderly in Zhou Wen's eyes. From the looks of the situation, Zhou Wen roughly knew that Shiryu was about to deduce a new essence energy art. It was a perfect domain power, but Shiryu had only deduced Purple Star Lord's power and not Truth Listener's power. This left Zhou Wen somewhat puzzled. Is it because truth listeners' power is difficult to deduce? Or is it because I already have the foundation of the minor heavenly cycle array? Zhou Wen guessed inwardly, but he found it difficult to make an accurate judgment. However, regardless, it was an excellent thing for Zhou Wen. This was because as long as Shiryu deduced Purple Star Lord's essence energy art, he could directly prevent this power from circulating in Shiryu's domain. Now, Zhou Wen was already looking forward to the day when Shiryu could stop the massive heavenly cycle stellar array from circulating. Just the thought of heading to Forbidden City to find another Purple Star Lord and stopping her massive heavenly cycle stellar array with a single order in front of her made Zhou Wen wish he could head to Forbidden City immediately. It was clearly not an easy task to deduce Purple Star Lord's essence energy art. Like a spider weaving a web, Shiryu constantly perfected the nomological web, hoping to connect it into a complete network. However, there were just too many missing parts in the middle. Shiryu's weaving speed was just too slow. At this speed, it would probably be difficult to fill in all the parts in less than a decade. At that moment, Zhou Wen suddenly felt the massive heavenly cycle stellar array that had gradually turned clear, suddenly turned blurry. What was even more terrifying was that in the blurry starlight, 12 mysterious palaces seemed to appear. Each palace seemed to contain a mysterious power that exceeded the mortal world. Furthermore, each palace had its own different style. Some were as mighty as the sea, some were as dangerous as an abyss, some were mysterious and unfathomable, and some were as benevolent as a mountain. The power of each palace was shocking. Just looking at the phantom of the palace nearly made Zhou Wen's will collapse. He felt as though he was an ant under the heavenly Tao. The 12 palaces were like temples that ruled over all things in the universe. Any one of them could dictate the fate of all things. Life and death could be seized with a single thought. At that moment, the 12 palaces came crashing down at the same time. Beneath the palaces was the handsome and wild truth listener with its golden hair fluttering in the wind. This is bad. Zhou Wen sensed the terrifying power in the 12 palaces. Even though it was just the remnant might, the hell-level sword domain outside him had already shattered like scrap metal. It couldn't withstand a single blow. No matter how Zhou Wen extracted his essence energy, he couldn't restore the sword domain. Just as Zhou Wen imagined that he would have to grind the dungeon again, Truth Listener suddenly leaped up. Under the infinite pressure, it charged towards the palace. End of this chapter. Chapter 1686. Purple Star Lord seemed to be an emperor that had existed since ancient times. He looked down on all life from the top of the 12 celestial palaces as though everything in the world was just a toy in his hands. Thearchs are born and the heavens fall. All fates are within the 12 celestial palaces. Nothing in the world can defy them. Looking at Truth Listener, who was defying the heavens, Purple Star Lord slashed down slightly with a mystic ice sword in his hand. The 12 celestial palaces came crashing down as though the universe was suppressed under them. The tiny Truth Listener was like a drop in the ocean beneath the 12 celestial palaces. It was almost negligible. However, Truth Listener's eyes burned like the golden sun. It didn't dodge or hesitate at all. Its burning body stretched its arm to its limit as it punched at the celestial palaces that were crashing down from the sky. Boom! A mysterious celestial palace that represented fate was smashed into pieces by Truth Listener's fist. The wreckage scattered everywhere. Truth Listener was like a tyrant that defied the heavens. It was fearless as it coldly faced the heavens and continued charging into the sky with unstoppable momentum. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. Zhou Wen saw mysterious and unfathomable celestial palaces that seemed to have the power to suppress fate being pierced through by Truth Listener. They were reduced to fragments that filled the sky. The scene was shocking, making one feel an inexplicable sense of awe. At the same time, it was as though a flame was burning in one's heart. All the blood in one's body seemed to boil. If the heavens destroy me, I will defy the heavens. If the Dharch slays me, I will kill the Dharch. No one in the universe can control my fate. In Zhou eyes, Truth Listener was like an ancient god of war that didn't respect the heavens or the gods. It used its body to profane divine might as it shattered the celestial palaces. Every time a celestial palace was shattered, cracks would appear on a mystic ice sword in Purple Star-Lord's hand. In the beginning, when a few celestial palaces were shattered, Purple Star-Lord was still able to maintain his calm. However, when he saw the celestial palaces shatter in an instant and Truth Listener still tore through the sky in an unstoppable manner, Purple Star-Lord's eyes behind his mask gradually turned somewhat alarmed. When the last celestial palace was shattered by Truth Listener, Purple Star-Lord's body trembled. The mystic ice sword in his hand shattered, shattering into pieces of ice that scattered everywhere. Truth Listener also arrived in front of Purple Star-Lord at that moment. The fist that burned with golden flames blasted at Purple Star-Lord in an unreasonable manner. With the 12 celestial palaces shattered, Ziwei Star-Lord's aura had already weakened to the extreme. He held the remnant sword and slashed at Truth Listener's fist with all his might. However, the instant the fist and sword collided, the remnant sword shattered. The fist that emitted golden light struck his chest. The armor, which was like profound ice, scattered like butterflies, revealing Ziwei Star-Lord's beautiful body and her beautiful face. She was as beautiful as a god, making it impossible for anyone to have any thoughts of blasphemy against her. However, Truth Listener's fist mercilessly slammed into the beautiful face, instantly blasting it apart. The head that was as beautiful as art exploded, and blood bloomed like chrysanthemum petals. Purple Star-Lord's headless body plummeted from the sky, transforming into points of mystic light that dissipated. Only a strange crystal landed on the ground. It emitted a resplendent starlight, like the eternal Polaris in the sky. Calamity Creature hunted Purple Star-Lord. Discovered Emperor Star Crystal. He's really dead. Zhou was pleasantly surprised as he looked at Truth Listener in the sky that resembled an ancient fiend celestial. Truth Listener's strength shocked even him. As expected of a companion beast from the heavenly realm. It's too powerful and violent. Zhou reached out to pick up the Emperor Star Crystal on the ground and looked at its stats while holding back his surprise. Emperor Star Crystal, Emperor Life Star, can receive the help of heaven and earth. Zhou looked at the simple line of information, but he was momentarily at a loss as to what it meant. Without a doubt, this Emperor Star Crystal was a treasure of this hidden dungeon. However, it was difficult to understand what it was used for. From the literal meaning, it meant that emperors were chosen by heaven and earth. Therefore, their life providence was extremely noble. Even heaven and earth would help them. However, what was the use of such a thing? Could it be that this thing can make the person who possesses it become the chosen son of heaven? From then on, everything will be smooth sailing for them. They can get whatever they want, and any monster they kill will drop a divine artifact. Not only will they not die from jumping off a cliff, but they can also have a fortuitous encounter. Zhou couldn't help but recall the legend of an ancient emperor. Legend had it that there was a chosen son of heaven who fought with a figure comparable to a transmigrator for power. This chosen son of heaven was originally retreating in defeat and was almost destroyed, but who knew that a meteorite would fall from the sky and wipe out the enemy's army, making him the final victor. This was nothing more than a chosen son of heaven. Zhou didn't dare hope that he would have such luck. He only hoped that he wouldn't be too unlucky. He attempted to absorb the Emperor Star Crystal, but it indicated that Zhou wasn't a companion beast and couldn't use the Emperor Star Crystal. Holy **T, this thing is for companion beasts? Zhou was rendered speechless. His dream of getting whatever he wanted was instantly shattered. If only companion beasts can use it, who should I use it on? Demonic Neonate is still evolving, so I can only choose another companion beast to use it on. Zhou was somewhat vexed. There was too little information on the Emperor Star Crystal, so he didn't know what use it had. If he gave it to a random companion beast, the benefits the companion beast obtained might not be as strong as expected. It might even have the opposite effect. If this thing was a treasure that could change one's life providence and change the life providence that was most compatible with a companion beast, what was the point of becoming an Emperor life providence? In terms of combat strength, Truth Listener was now Zhou Wen's most important combat strength. He naturally had to give it something good, but as he didn't know what use the Emperor Star Crystal had, Zhou Wen didn't dare take the risk with Truth Listener. After some thought, Zhou Wen summoned Tyrant Behemoth. This fellow had already advanced to the Calamity grade and had 2 life providences, Infinite Strength and Mountain River Devourer. Even if it changed to a useless life providence, its combat strength wouldn't be greatly reduced. Furthermore, its name had the word June in it. It could barely be related to an emperor, so Zhou Wen planned on using it to test the waters. After Tyrant Behemoth was summoned, it swallowed the Emperor's Star Crystal under Zhou Wen's orders. When the crystal entered its stomach, a blob of black starlight bloomed from Tyrant Behemoth's stomach. Soon, it enveloped Tyrant Behemoth's entire body in black light, as though it had transformed into a black hole. Zhou Wen heard Tyrant Behemoth's roar coming from the black hole before it quickly fell silent. Only the black hole-like light constantly distorted and changed. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.